What we done started. Look at what we done started. This the people party. Peace and love, party people, and a place to be. My name is Talib Kweli, the MCEO, the BKMC, the Little Lebowski Urban Achiever. This is the People's Party, the world's best podcast. And as always and as usual, I have the world's best podcast co-host in the place to be, Jasmin Leigh. How you doing, Jasmin? What's going on?
I just teared up all the claps. I'm doing great. I'm feeling like this guy is like my childhood, most of the songs. So I'm really freaking excited. I'm like,
oh yeah, this is an important guest we have.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a very, very important episode. This is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. This guest is somebody who I know personally. He was there at the beginning of my career. We were damn near working in the same building when I started my career. He is a one-of-a-kind producer and DJ, an entire architect of early 2000 hip-hop sounds, a pioneer in sampling. This man mashes up 70s samples with hard-hitting beats like nobody else does on this planet. One of the greatest hip-hop producers, not just hip-hop, music producers of all time. Mm-hmm. His list of hits spans across many, many genres. This is the man behind Girls, 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 Rock the Mic, Oh Boy, Welcome to New York, Can't Let You Go, Never Been in Love, that is my song.
Yes,
and
it
Hostile
is.
Gospel, that is also my song. Show Me What You Got, Live Your Life, No Love, All Around the World. Look, if I named all his songs, we would just go home. We wouldn't have time to
Queen
interview.
Bee.
Yeah, so his list of collaborators knows no equal. From Jay-Z to Cameron to Jadakiss to Fabulous, DMX, Eric Sermon, Mariah Carey, Beyonce, Joe Budden, Diddy, Ghostface Killer, Saigon, Jay Electronica, Lil Wayne, Rick Ross, Kendrick Lamar.
Damn.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the incredible frontman of the legendary Blazettes, Just Blaze in the place. That is a beautiful shirt, bro.
Thank you. Shout out to Solomon for styling my outfit. Yeah, I was getting ready to come out here, and I was in the closet getting ready.
Okay.
And this shirt just happened to fall off the top shelf of the closet, and he immediately was like, he said his exact words, "Daddy, that's the most amazing shirt I've ever seen. Can you wear it?"
Aww.
So here I am.
He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, that's hard.
Now, let's start from the very beginning.
Sure.
We're going to start from your humble beginnings in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Your father was an organist who taught himself how to read music, but backwards.
Yes.
That's correct, right?
Yep.
Tell me what that means.
So he reverse engineered learning how to play. In other words, what he would do is learn to play a song by ear, then get the sheet music and figure out what was happening on the sheet music when he was playing certain notes. And so basically learned backwards. He would learn to play the song first, then learn how to translate that according to what was going on on the sheet music. I just kind of sat behind him and watched him all day.
Yeah.
And kind of picked it up from him.
Yeah. Now, he was also a computer programmer, right?
Yes.
We had will.i.am on. It was an amazing interview, but one of the first things he said that was intriguing to me was he was like, I can't play piano like Prince or Stevie Wonder.
Right.
I can't sing like, Aretha Franklin or this person. He said, but what I can do is I can play the hell out of that computer.
Same here.
Same with you.
Same exact thing. A lot of times people will listen to my records and be like, who played the drums on this? Who played the keys on that? And I'm like, that's just all me and a mouse, or me and the pads. I think because I spent so much time listening to him, but then also just kind of absorbing music in general, I've kind of figured out how to make it sound like it was a 20-piece orchestra and a live drum kit and guitarist and a bassist and whatnot, but that was really just all me, kind of reverse engineering. Right. Like my dad, I would spend the money on the equipment and then kind of figure out how to, all right, this bass patch by itself doesn't really seem like much, right? Because you spend $5,000 on this keyboard, you expect it to just come out the box like, like when I was a kid and bought my first ASR 10, like I thought I was going to be RZA out the box,
right? Because
I had the same machine he did, but then I had to eventually, over time, learn how to make these machines do what they were actually designed to do, in terms of just be able to capture realistic performances or create realistic performances out of them, to the point where I was tricking people thinking that there were live musicians in the studio.
Right. And your mother collected vinyl? Did she do that?
So my mom, my Aunt Jenny, my cousin Carwin, they were all just avid music lovers. My aunt collected a lot of records. Like a lot of my childhood record collection came from her records. And then my other cousin Carwin that I mentioned, he lived right around the corner from a record store. So, and this is like Profile Records era, Sutra Records era. So it's Fat Boys, Run DMC, Houdini, that first wave of like hip hop really being on wax. And what he would do is he would buy the singles, and then as the albums would come out, he would give me the singles because now he had the whole album.
Right.
So that's kind of, if I got the record collecting bug anywhere, it would have definitely been, from that experience with him, growing up with him.
Word up.
So what's crazy is that when we were all on MySpace and stuff, we didn't know that we were doing computer codes.
Right.
Your father taught you computer codes, and why do you think it's so important for Black kids to learn them as well?
So he didn't teach me directly, but what happened was maybe 2nd or 3rd grade, they bought us a computer. This was back when having a computer in your house was not a normal thing. And I would go to his library. He had in his I guess we call his man cave, his walls were all programming books. So I would basically take the same way I used to play his keyboard when he wasn't looking. I would take his books and teach myself how to code from what was in the books. So that in turn, I studied computer programming my whole life, all through grammar school, high school, and college. Obviously, I didn't end up using it directly in that field, but everything that I learned in computer programming is what I use for music programming. It's all logic, right? It's no pun intended.
Right.
It's still.
Because I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's just technical talk. Yeah, like it's like actual real logic.
Right, not the program.
Yeah, I think that's why I grasped certain concepts very early, like in terms of like algebra and geometry, like in like 6th grade, the teacher just randomly decided to ask in class one day if x plus 2 equals 5, what is x? And I was like, 3.
3.
Because it's logical. And everybody else in the class is looking at me like, how do you even? But it was because of what was in those books. So to answer your the question, there's a lot more that you learn with your learning coding and programming than just how to make a computer do what you want it to do. There's just problem solving, different ways of approaching and solving problems, and getting to your end goal. And then when it came to music, it was kind of the same thing. When we're using these drum machines, these sequencers, these keyboards and whatnot, you are literally programming a computer.
Word. Now, you are also a name that I forgot to mention in the intro is the Megatron Don.
Yes.
He is, the Megatron Don. This is a fantastic moniker. I am somebody who grew up obsessing over Transformers.
Right.
So where does the name Megatron Don? What made you decide to call yourself that?
I honestly don't remember where it came from. It was, I think it was kind of like the Just Blaze name, where somebody said it in the studio as a joke, and it just stuck. Like,
did someone know you? Are you into Transformers?
Oh yeah. That's. I mean, that's why it even came about. I want to say it was around the time we were doing Live Your Life, maybe, and with T.I. And I want to say Takara had just released. They had just started doing what they call masterpiece Transformers, which are like adult, expensive adult versions of the toys we grew up with. And I want to say the Megatron one had just come out. And I remember T.I. being in the studio was like, is that Transformer? Because the Megatron is like in gun mode, he's like this big, so it looked like a giant.
What about that? What you know about that?
It looked like a giant gat on the board. Like it looks kind of realistic. So he's like, yo, what is this? And I was like, oh, that's just Megatron. Look.
Right.
But I want to say the Megatron ended up becoming a fixture in Baseline. So it definitely had something to do around that. I just don't remember who came up with it.
Right. Now, you said something, I'm going to quote you. The key to my overall journey is the things I relish now are the same things I relished when I was 6 years old.
Indeed.
Yes. I love that. You and I are on a Star Wars Brothers group chat.
Right.
And I'm happy that I was invited to that because that's like an elite invitation.
It is.
You know what I'm saying? So tell me about how these creative influences from your childhood still inspire you today.
Well, I mean, music is my first love, right? And some of my first memories of, I don't want to say my first memories of music, but my first memories of falling in love with music were a lot of times tied to media that I was consuming. So, for example, like the first time that I ever heard music and said, I want to do this, it wasn't a hip-hop record, it wasn't a disco record, it wasn't a breakbeat. It was listening to John Williams' Star Wars score.
Right.
You
That
know,
makes a
like,
lot of sense.
as a kid, I remember my dad had the original soundtrack.
That John Williams score is a character in the film.
Exactly,
Yeah.
it is. You take the music out, you get a whole different movie.
Right, and then have you ever gone to see it with an orchestra playing?
Yeah, with the orchestra playing,
Yeah.
it's crazy. So, like, I remember the back of the album cover is a giant helmet of Darth Vader. Now, I'm like 4, right? 3, 4 years old. So at that time, the character of Darth Vader was the scariest thing ever.
Yeah.
Which sounds silly to say as an adult, but you put yourself in that mind frame.
Nah, I just watched Empire Strikes Back the other day.
You were still scared?
And it still holds up.
Right.
Darth Vader is one of the best villains of all time.
Right.
It's psychological, though.
Right, exactly. So, but I remember then, I was familiar with the movie, but like something told me to put the record on, and when I did, it's just it was my first time listening to a soundtrack outside of the context of consuming it with a movie. And I just fell in love. And I remember saying to myself as a kid, this is what I want to do. And I loved, the hip hop records and the new wave and all the stuff that I was being exposed to. But what made me say I want to do this was I wanted to make this kind of music and I want to put it in a movie.
That's beautiful.
All right, so we all know how I feel about Star Wars if you watch the show. But for the sake of our guests and for the sake of my FOMO, what goes on in the Star Wars group and who else is in it?
Man, it's a secret society. All we ask is trust.
Ooh! What? All right, that's fine.
Roc-A-Fella overlap bar.
And that's fine. So, something you will answer.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your love of sneakers? We see you wearing some fly-ass sneakers right there. And also talk to us about your brand new show on UPROXX, Fresh Pairs. What is the concept of the show? And
So sneakers is something that I've never been, or my love for sneakers is something that I've never really been able to contextualize or verbalize. And I feel like for a lot of us who just grew up in that first wave of sneakers becoming a fashionable thing, for a lot of us it just stuck. It was kind of a way to identify yourself or who you are. The first time you felt cool, right, was when you got a pair of dope shoes. So like I remember my 2 memories, going back to what we were saying about embracing things from when you were young. I remember being in pre-K at Daycare 100, and Pro Kids was the thing to have when I was like 3, 4 years old. And I remember begging my mom for some Pro Kids.
Everlasting.
at 3
Right.
years
Like the
old?
tongue on Pro K.
Yep. That and also Zips. Cause I remember in the commercial for Zips, there was this kid who put on, I want to say they were a blue and white pair of Zips, and he jumped across the street.
I remember this.
So it's like, if I get some Zips, I might be able to jump across the street.
I remember thinking the same shit.
Yeah, like you believed what you saw
Yeah.
on TV at that point.
And y'all ain't jumped nowhere.
I thought I jumped across the street. I probably jumped more like 5 feet.
You know
You
what's
wasn't
crazy
even allowed
about
to
you
cross
saying
the
this?
street.
Is that they have this documentary about Sesame Street, the gang documentary, Our Gang, whatever. It's a great documentary, but the major takeaway is, the Madison Avenue advertisement mind state is that you had educators who were studying television, and they were noticing that kids were singing songs for cigarettes and alcohol.
It's
so-
music, yeah.
Right. So what they did was they said, we need to create a show that uses advertising techniques to teach kids how to read.
Wow,
You know
and
what
that's
I'm
how
saying?
that came about.
That's how Sesame Street was
I
created.
never knew that.
So that's what makes me think about what you're saying.
Right, like as a kid, it was like I was programmed. Same thing with kangaroos, right?
Yeah, ruse.
And, yep, rules. And then you fast forward a few years later, the Jordan 1 didn't hit me, the 2 didn't hit me, but when the 3 came out, the 3 was the one that really, really did it for me. Like I remember, and these are $100 plus sneakers.
You had to be a tough guy to wear them shoes.
Right.
On my way.
So like I remember when it was out of my little crew, the 3 of us, one of us, Jose, he got a pair of
That's
Jordan
crazy.
3s.
The one dude I knew who had some Jordan 3s
Was
was
Jose?
named Jose.
Shout out to Jose.
Shout out all the Jose's in New York City. And he was on the baseball team, and he was the second Jose on the team, so we used to call him Jose B.
Wait. Talib, you expect us to believe that you were playing baseball? Is that what we're doing
I was
here?
ill at baseball. That was my
Okay.
whole life.
I was terrible at baseball.
That was my whole life. But please continue. I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
you're good. You're good. So I remember like it was the kind of thing where we would take turns wearing his shoes. Like one of our parents would take us to the mall and hang out for an hour or 2. And it was like one weekend it was Tommy's turn, one weekend it was my turn, one weekend it was his turn. But his mom's like, God, he used to get him fresh. So he had the jumpsuit the whole night. We wasn't wearing each other's clothes, but we definitely used to, trade kicks. But like, you know, I can't put my finger on the what or the when or the why. It was just something that I fell in love with. And, you know, throughout one of the first things that I did when I got money, so you remember Transit right across from Roc-A in the cutting room.
Yeah.
So like my first check that I got, I did the thing that, you know, you imagine or you have that dream of doing where you walk into the sneaker store and you're like, I want that, you know, like, and kind of bought out every pair that I wanted from
Transit.
Yeah, what was his name? Danny. Danny sold them to me. And yeah, so like I kind of in the process kind of became known as one of the early sneakerheads in hip hop culture, like in terms of like when the game started to change.
Well, I feel like you're a collector.
Right.
I feel like you was collecting, you know, keyboards and computer shit back in the days, collecting records. You collect polo gear.
Right.
You collect sneakers. You collect, you know, you're a collector.
Yeah, that used to be one of my AKAs was the collector. Yeah. So like fast forwarding, you know, 20 plus years later, now we have a show called Fresh Pair with me and my homegirl Caddy Customs, also part of UPROXX. And the idea is, you know, like we were sitting talking about the concept of the idea of the show. Guys in positions like us, like we can, and by us I mean artists, industry people, producers, whatever. You know, we can call a Nike, you know, Nike or Adidas or whoever and just say, yo, send me the shoe in this color, you know, and 2 months later it's at your doorstep. You know, it's a one of one and it's cool. But it's like for people who have that kind of access, what can you do to create something for them that's beyond just a dope colorway or a color that nobody has, right? So we had the idea of being able to tell people's lives through the art that's created on these shoes. So it's not just, so at first glance, it might just look like a cool colorway or some cool extra textures or materials or whatever. But when you actually start going through the detail of the shoe, you realize that every detail on that shoe is a landmark for a conversation about somebody's or about a particular part of somebody's life or about their journey. And what we've been experiencing so far while recording it is, at first the artists are just like, oh yeah, that's hard, I like that. But then when me and Caddy start breaking down why things are where they are, it gives them a whole different level of appreciation for the shoe.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, you know what I like in it too? Kind of like how you're sitting there with your script, the questions. Our script is the shoe.
Right.
Same idea, but our shoe is the script.
This is your life, but in a shoe.
That's exactly. No, the funny thing is that's exactly. You see, Steve is laughing. That's the exact. We've used that phrase almost every taping. It's like, this is your life in a shoe.
In a shoe. Now, New Jersey is essentially New York. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like you're in New York.
Is it?
It really is.
Is it?
It is. I mean, you know, I make fun of Bridge and Tunnel.
Is it? Okay, I'm sorry.
But, okay, we talk about the tri-state area, right?
Okay.
But fuck Connecticut.
All right. Fuck Connecticut. What is there?
I want to talk about the importance of New York City radio.
Yes,
and
definitely.
Growing up, I grew up listening to Z100, which became the format for the Z Morning Zoos, for the morning zoos across the nation.
I remember the Z Morning Zoo very well.
Yeah, Scott Shannon and Mr. Leonard. And I grew up listening to BLS versus Kiss, and the whole Bridge versus BDP Wars, and Mr. Magic and Red Alert and
Chill Out.
Yeah, man, take me through that era in your life.
So that era is actually beyond important, and near and dear to me. You know, because going back to my cousin that I mentioned earlier, whose records I used to inherit, I would spend the night at his house on weekends. And he had 2 boom boxes. So Friday and Saturday nights, we would have our tapes. One would be recording 98, one would be recording 107. And we would just be, you know, we would rock the tapes all week, following week come. And you would have to, you know, I'm like 6 and he's like 12. So it's not like we had money to just keep buying cassettes. So we would have to end up recording over the shows and whatnot. Right. But then at that same time, you have Friday night videos and New York hot tracks with Carlos starting up. So it was like, going to his house on the weekends was like education for me because we're watching both video shows, we're taping both radio shows. Yeah. You know, so it was really like that experience that most people get around 13, 14, but they start to discover who they are through the music they like and the things that they see. I was going through that at like 6 or 7 years old, and it was like overload of it. You know, but that ritual of, you know, waiting until 9 p.m. to hear whatever Red was going to play or Marley or Chuck was going to play. And then later on, as those shows advanced, and you had guys like Pete Rock, like
Right.
when the show became Marley Marl in Control,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had Pete and Clark and Kevy Kev.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it was at that moment where it was like I was already obsessed with the idea of DJing, like from listening to Red Alert, but you fast forward to that Marley Marl in Control era. That's when the production techniques started to advance.
They was bringing the drum machines to the studio.
Right, they were bringing the machines to the studio. They're cutting up break beats, you know, and you really got to experience more of the nuts and bolts. Artists were coming up to freestyle. You know, like I have a tape of like one night Clark was DJing, so it was Clark, Freshco, Nice and Smooth.
Freshco.
Yeah, Freshco.
He won the New
Music Seminar, right.
Yeah. Did
like,
he ever have, he had one single?
He only had a few. He had We Don't Play. He had Ain't You Freshco.
Oh, that's right.
4 at a time. But there was like one that kind of hit.
Yeah.
But that night, like Clark is DJing, Freshco opens it up, then Nice and Smooth come on, then Craig G, and then they even got Teddy Ted to rhyme. But what really blew my mind was these artists were freestyling, they're rhyming live on the radio, right? But then Smooth B reuses those rhymes years later for Dwick.
Did you have a tape of it, or you
Yes,
just okay?
I did.
So you're like, oh, okay.
Like I said, you're starting
I
to
left
see.
my Philly at home.
You're starting
to
to
have
hear,
another.
And did you have to pop the things in your cassette as well?
Oh, put the tissue on top.
Yeah, we just learned about that yesterday.
Yeah, like I still had a lot of those tapes until when I was very young, and right around the time that I moved to New York, and I met when I started working at the cutting room. Craig G, we were working, or Dave, the owner, was working with Craig G.
Shout out to Dave.
Right, shout out to Dave.
Yeah.
So I meet Craig
And
G.
shout out to Craig G.
Yeah, so I meet Craig and I'm hyped, like, oh my God, it's Craig G.
Right.
Like, Craig, I have a whole box of In Control freestyles, and I'm breaking down all the episodes. So he's like, yeah, let me borrow those.
So wait, Craig took you,
I'm just like, here, Craig, here you
and
go.
you never saw it again?
So I never saw those tapes again, but thankfully, the homie DJ Eclipse came through.
Oh man,
Because he's been archiving and collecting for many years. So every once in a while, I'll remember a night on the radio, like, yo, do you have the night Nice and Smooth went up there and did premiere No Delaying, blah, blah, blah. And, he'll find it in his archive and send it to me, So,
Oh, wow.
but those tapes, like, that was my lifeblood as a kid. Like being exposed to this music at this time when the production sound is changing. Marley's bringing reels right from his crib right to the to the station. Going back to what I was saying about the nuts and bolts, now they're playing the break beats that are being sampled in the record. Like Clark and Pete is playing Ultimate Beats and Breaks for an hour. So for me a lot that led to a lot of the discovery of the fact that these breaks that they're cutting up that are also in these records that are out, like records that they're being sampled in, is also in my mom's attic. So like, somebody mentions the name Funky Drummer. I'm in my mom's attic 2 days later, flipping through her 45s, and I see this thing called James Brown Funky Drummer. And I put it on, and it's the drums. It's Rebel Without a Pause. It's all these records that I'm hearing. So those early mix shows or those golden era mix shows were the entry point to so much for me.
That's crazy to hear you say this, because I listened to you on Questlove Supreme.
Right.
And one of the greatest things I ever heard, and I encourage anyone who is a producer, anyone who is a live musician, anyone who really loves hip-hop culture to check out Just Blaze's interview on Questlove Supreme's podcast, because Quest is such a nerd. Like, when I go to see Questlove DJ, it's a lesson.
Right, it's a lesson.
He's trying to show you, look what I got.
Right.
Look what, you know what I'm saying? And so he's putting you to the test,
Right.
because he knows that you got that same better
Mentality.
knowledge.
Right.
And so he's playing, this shit was crazy to me. He's playing snares.
Right.
Boom. What's that? Just Blaze tell you the name of the record. Like, and you was like, if you had to grade, you got it probably 90, 95%.
Wow.
There's
Right.
one or two that you didn't know.
Right. But you know what that comes to, or comes from partially. Speaking of Z100 in the Morning Zoo, they used to do that every morning. I remember being in a car with my mom driving to school in the morning, and they would do exactly that. They would play a half a second of a song, and you had to guess it. So that was a game that me and my family played for
He was like,
years.
I've been training for this my whole life.
Right.
Let's go,
So
Quest.
so by the time if you remember, what was the one show? It might have been Kevin Keith and the Dirty Dozen. It was a mix, another indie mix show. They used to do the same thing, but it was like with hip hop records. And I must have won that contest like 4 weeks in a row. And even actually, Mr. Magic, Rap Attack, I won about 6 weeks in a row on that when I was like 12.
Yeah, I heard that story once.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and like it got to the point where they would be like, Justin, where's your mom? Just put your mom on the phone.
Can you come?
Yeah, like, and I remember like I would, win all types of stuff, but most of the stuff was things that I was too young to even partake in, like concerts or whatever, or club nights, where Marley or somebody might have been DJing.
Right.
But yeah, like, so yeah, like you said, I kind of felt like, I've been training for this my whole life.
Right.
So how did New Jersey house music inspire you? And can you take us into how you broke Shake That Ass Girl at 16, which clearly you started your career at 5.
Right. So, growing up, especially in Jersey, like hip hop and house went hand in hand. It wasn't weird to like go to a party and you would hear just as much hip hop as you would house music. Mm-hmm. And it was stuff that we were creating, stuff that was obviously coming from New York City, stuff from Chicago as well.
Baltimore too, right?
Right, but saying Baltimore. So like Baltimore came into play a little bit later. Like 91-ish, 92-ish. But like the first, like what you would call prototype, what we now know as Baltimore house or Baltimore club music, was this record, pardon my language, Dick Control.
Mm-hmm.
And
a great name for a record.
And every
just good advice in general in life.
So if you listen to like any Baltimore club record, the drum pattern is boom, 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 doom, doom. So that's a loop like from the opening of Dick Control. And it was an EP called It's Your Birthday by this dude named Tap, who I believe has passed away. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Tap.
That was on one side, Dick Control was on one side, and you had Shake That Ass on the other side. At this point, I'm DJing at a roller skating rink called Skaters World in Jersey. You had two main rinks. You had the rink, which Flex used to DJ at, and then you had Skaters World, where I was at, along with my brother DJ Pound and my homie AP. And what we used to do was, at a certain time, we would open up the floor. The whole skating rink would just be dancing.
Yep.
So one night, we had a little bit of money. We booked Mr. C and Wendy Williams. This is back when he used to DJ on her show, if I'm not mistaken. And I played, I'm going through my Jersey club set. So I'm playing, Percolator, Follow Me, all the classics of that era, and then I go into Shake That Ass. And C had never heard a lot of these records before, because this was a very localized thing. Like, a lot of this wasn't even really happening in New York like that.
Yeah.
So he hears Shake That Ass, and he sees the reaction, and he runs over like, yo, what is this? What are you playing? So we exchange information, and he's like, yo, I need to copy this record. Can you help me out? Because back then, nowadays you would just give somebody an MP3, email them a file. Back then you had to
Shazam it.
Right. We exchange information, and he has me meet him at the Cold Chillin offices when I was 16 to give him a copy of the record. Which you can imagine, giving you all the backstory that I just gave you about Marley and all that and whatnot.
Cold Chillin.
I'm in the office, and I meet Len Fitzgerald, and he's actually like playing. He's like, I just signed this artist, I just signed this, and this, and he's getting my feedback as a young, kid DJ. So my whole mind is just blown by the experience. But then what ends up happening was he was like, yo, I want to flip this record and do a remix. So he ends up doing the Shake That Ass that got played in mostly hip-hop clubs and on hip-hop radio. But the wildest thing was, like, he didn't forget about me. And on that record, if you look, the very last credit went to me, to DJ Just from Jersey.
Right.
But for me, that was like confirmation that I was on the right path. Like, that was a pause. That was a huge battery in my back.
Right. Now, definitely shout out to Mr. C. He's so important to so many people origin stories in hip hop, including yours.
Right.
I just DJ'd a party with you. This party was crazy because I still look up to you as a DJ, because I'm celebrity DJ. I'm selector. Like, I'm still pay my dues to the OGs who come through. And I knew I was going to DJ before you, so in my mind, I'm like, yo, I'm going to play some shit that Just is going to appreciate.
Right.
Like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm going to play. I'm not going to play for the crowd.
Right.
I'll play for Just, because I know, like, because I didn't know your house roots at that point.
Right.
I had never heard you play like that.
Right.
And this party was a free format, and there was a lot of the dancers come. And he was playing.
If it's a Danny Castro party and it's a Tony Touch thing and it's at Chelsea Music Hall, you're going to get the dancers.
You're going to get the dancers.
Right.
So I played what I thought was some really great hip hop and some hip hop references stuff. And you played an amazing house set.
Thank you.
And that's when I first realized, I was like, oh.
Right.
But you was playing that type of shit. And I was like, oh, okay, this is his real roots. But going back to Mr. C, I heard you talk about Mr. C playing you the Brooklyn Zoo dudes.
So this was actually that day, and it wasn't C that played it for me. It was Lenny Finchberg, who was the president of Cold Chillin.
Okay.
He was the one who played it for me, and I was very confused.
Right.
Well, because it was like Dirty had just come out with Brooklyn Zoo.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking that it's that, a reference to that, and it wasn't. It was just some dudes named Brooklyn Zoo.
So it was Mike Garrett. Me and him went to 6th grade together.
Okay.
Remember we talking about those Jordan 3s? He had them Jordan 3s.
Okay.
Because him and Jose. But Jose had him because his mom bought him.
Right.
Mike had him because he was selling crack.
Oh. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? He was rest in peace to Mike Garrett.
In 6th grade.
This was 6th grade.
Selling crack.
He was the crack dealer in 6th grade. And I remember this because I remember it was the first time I saw crack vials.
Right.
So like there's some, not on the street, because you step on them on the street,
but in
someone
person,
having crack vials on them was the first time I seen this.
So he showed them off in class or something?
He was my friend in school, so I just saw, but I remember he was very, very poor.
Right.
Very, 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 very poor. And years later, as I'm trying to make, not just junior high school, maybe like in high school, I'm trying to make my name.
Right.
And he's now linked up with a dude from Coney Island named Paulie.
Okay.
And they got a crew called TF, Together Forever.
Okay.
And if you was in New York at the time, you remember they used to have the stencils. If you look down, you see the TF logo on the ground. That was always them, right? And so they was like, we a rap group, and I was going to border school. I was selling weed for him at border school.
Right.
I would go to him, get weed from him, and then I would smoke too much of it, and then I would not have my re-up. I was a terrible drug dealer.
Talib! Oh my God, the same thing happened to me. When I was a drug dealer for like a month. So the girl gave me the weed, and she was like, just sell it and just give me the money left. You can sell it for whatever you want. And I smoked like the whole thing, and I had to go and hide it for like a week.
My story, he went in hiding. See, this was my friend, so he forgave me.
Right.
But what's funny about that is I thought for a long time I smoked all the weed, and I didn't. The
It's so
fucking
much
white
math,
boy
though.
Ben did.
White boy Ben?
White boy Ben. This white boy who I went to boarding school with,
Right.
I went to boarding school in Connecticut, like fuck Connecticut.
Fuck Connecticut.
I did a show at Toad's Place, which is a great place. Shout out to Toad's
Shout out to
Place
Toad's.
in Connecticut. I did a show at Toad's Place, and Ben came to my show.
Right.
And he was like, I have to, part
Smoke
of my
your weed.
12-step program. Right?
Right.
Oh, apologize.
I have to apologize to you because I stole weed from you every day in high school.
Wow.
That's what this man came and told me. And then I was like, I had a bunch of weed on me. I was like, well, shit, that was a long time ago. Smoke one with your boy.
Right.
He was like, I can't, because if I do that, I'm going to be back on heroin. You know what I'm saying? But anyway,
That was really deep.
I say all that to say, Mike Garrett and Paulie, the Together Forever thing didn't work. So
Right.
then they tried something different. They were like, yo, this was before Wu-Tang came out.
Right.
They were like, we gonna be animals. Paulie, I forget what kind of animal Paulie was, but Mike was, my name is Roger Rab now.
Okay.
And he took his hair, he had dreads. He put his dreads in the bunny ears.
I kind of vaguely
He's like,
remember
because it's like
this.
rabbit ears. He's like, every person is an animal. We the Brooklyn Zoo. So around that time, Old Dirty came with Brooklyn Zoo.
Right.
And then they was beefing. There was
Wow.
beef in the streets between the two different Brooklyn Zoos.
Wow.
The kid Mike went to jail for a long time. I think he passed away in jail a few years ago.
Wow.
But that's...
So that was the Brooklyn Zoo
That's
that
the
was
Brooklyn
on
Zoo.
Cold Chillin.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you say that because I do vaguely remember somebody with, as soon as you mentioned the
was the
dreads
leader.
thing, like in the rabbit ears, I'm like,
Yeah.
yo, I remember that.
Yeah.
I just remember being there very confused. Like,
Those was real street dudes. Though,
Right.
Like real, like mobbed up gangster street dudes.
right.
Doing like zany rap shit.
Yeah, it was interesting because again, like you're wide-eyed as a kid, you don't really know. You know what I mean? So it was, I remember you don't want to say what you really think because you're a kid and you're so Lynn's like, so what do you think? And I'm like, it was kind of like, what's her name? Like Chrissy Teigen's face, like the.
You leave Chrissy Teigen alone.
But that's kind of what it was. It was like, I don't really know what to say to this. I'm just grateful to be in the presence of what I'm, of where I am and
Word.
and within these historic walls. But it was it was probably my first time having to put the poker face on when it came to music. Like,
Right.
I'm just like, yeah, sounds good.
Now I did a speaking engagement for a school this morning on Zoom, and they're studying Lyricist Lounge in their class.
Wow.
Which is like amazing. It makes me feel real old.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But they're like, tell us about you. What was it like at Lyricist Lounge? What was it like going to SOBs?
Right.
And I told them about my first Lyricist Lounge. It was at SOBs. Danny and Anthony used to front on me. They used to be like, nah, you got to get better, which God bless them for that.
Wow.
For real. They used to be, I always tell them that. They used to always be on me. The first time they let me perform at Lyricist Lounge, I let John Forte come.
Right.
And he rapped too long, and then I didn't really get no bars off. So I felt like I wasted my shot. Then I came back and the Q-Tip was hosting. It was me, Problem. Remember Problem from Flatbush? And it was Rah Digga and Young Z.
Wow.
And this is how I met Digga. She was pregnant.
Right.
Ramen, and she murdered. I think she might have got her deal with Tip that night.
That night, right.
You know
That might have come from that.
Yeah, so tell me about being in Jersey and just the outsiders and who was popping in New Jersey hip hop.
So it's funny that you mentioned that because like my first session ever that I was a part of at the cutting room was right when Tip signed Digga. It was a Digga session and a kid Cold Roots was producing. And I'm like, I'm not actually engineering or anything. Like this is my first 2 or 3 days there. You know, just kind of being an assistant in the room. And at the time, I was still going to Rutgers in Newark. So I'm around peripherally. I'm around a lot.
And you moved to New York with $40 in your pocket?
Literally $40. Yeah.
Jesus.
So I do this session, and then the following week, I'm at some open mic thing. I forget somewhere. I think it might have been in Irvington. But Mos and Digga show up and perform. And Digga does the record that we had just worked on in the studio a week before. So that was like one of those moments that, because up until this point, rappers are like superheroes, right? You know, like they're just people that I'm seeing on TV or people whose records that I'm playing. All of a sudden now, this record that I kind of had a remote connection to from working in that session is being performed on the stage. It's a small stage, but it's still a stage. So that was it's one of those things where all of a sudden, like, it became more feasible that something that I was a part of could be something greater, right? Around that same time, you had the whole Outsiders crew, obviously. You had Lords of the Underground. You had Redman. Redman had been taken off by this point. He's a superstar. But specifically Artifacts and Outsiders. Going back to things getting humanized. I was through a friend of mine, DJ Porno, who was from Newark. He was cool with Tame. Porn and his people had a weekly open mic that they would do at this place called The Pipeline in Newark. And it became really big locally to the point where like the Outs would show up. Tame and them was always there. Red came one night. You know, people would just get up and rhyme. And eventually Porn was always a super supporter of me, like right from when he first met me. He always used to be like, yo, you're going to be somebody one day. So like when he would have his parties, he would let me get on and DJ. And like, it wasn't like a thing where you could open for me. He'd be like, yo, just go ahead and rock. So one night we were doing an open mic thing. And this was right when Young Z had put out, remember he had a record with KRS-One called Milk. And I forget what the B-side of it was, but I remember like tripping like, wow, you have KRS-One on your album. He came, he brought 2 copies to the booth. So at a certain point, what I used to do sometimes when I would play tape of my beats, in between rappers, not for people to rap on, I would play commercially released records for people to rhyme on, and then in between MCs, I would play my beats. So one night the Outs get on, and one of my beats was playing as they walked on. So I went to go put on whatever record might have been hot at the time, and they were like, no, put that other beat back on. I'm thinking that they're talking about the last record I played, and I realized that they're talking about my beat, and I'm like, yeah, I want to rhyme on my beat. So again, just going to the humanization of it, it was like, oh, wait, like this is really something that could really happen.
I can do this.
Right. You know, so that kind of became a thing where folks would show up, and it was okay for me to, you know, I had that validation, you know, that self-validation to go ahead and not be scared and play my music.
That's dope. I was such a fan of that whole crew, Pace One.
Yeah.
You know, all of them. Slangtown, rest in peace, all of them.
What was it like getting a call from G. Roberson to help start what will be called the Rock the World production team?
You know who Bruce Hornsby is, right?
And The Range?
Yes.
Certainly.
So so we're at, I'm working at the cutting room. And actually, let me backtrack a bit. Dino, who signed Cash Money originally to Universal, right? I had a meeting with Dino. I forget how I ended up there, but had a meeting with Dino, came in with a CD, played on about 20 beats. And this was right when he was getting ready to work on Rakim's follow-up to the 18th Letter, a Cannabis album. He had a bunch of stuff lined up. The meeting went amazingly well. You know, he's super excited. He's like, I'm working on this album, I just got these dudes named Cash Money from the South. Like, so it's going to be real crazy over here. Like, we need to get you in the system. So I'm walking at this meeting feeling like $1 million. Never hear from him again. Oh. And about 2 to 3 weeks later, I'm at the cutting room. And at the time, I bring up Bruce because Bruce was one of our big clients at the time.
Okay.
I want to say he might have been working with David Byrne from the Talking Heads, maybe. Maybe there was some kind of connection there. But Bruce was a prankster, so he would like prank call the studio and be like, "Hey, can I speak to Justin?" But yeah, hey, this is Joe Blow from Galaxy Records. We want to offer you a record deal, blah blah blah. Because he knew I was an aspiring producer.
You get prank calls from Bruce.
That is really fucked up.
One day, I get a call, and or I was answering phones at the studio. Mm-hmm. I answer the phone and I'm like, the person asks for me. And I'm like, this is he. He's like, yeah, my name is G. Roberson. I'm from Roc-A-Fella Records. I wanted to speak to you about some music. And I was like, hi, very funny, Bruce. And then...
It's like a TV show.
Yeah, and then like 30 seconds later, the phone rings again. It's like, hey, I was trying to talk to Just, but I got disconnected. And I'm like, who is this? It's like, my name is G. Roberson. I'm from Roc-A-Fella Records. Did you make a beat that goes like this? And he starts singing it into the phone, and I'm like, yeah, what's going on here?
Did you make a beat that goes like this?
Yeah, he actually started singing it into the phone. So he explains, he said, so I have an artist by the name of Bathgate. He can rhyme, but he doesn't have a demo. I took him to a meeting with Dino, and Dino put your CD in for him to perform to. We would love to have a meeting with you. So I'm like, oh, this is for real. Mm. You said you're from Roc-A-Fella? He's like, yeah. So I go to talk to Dave, and I'm like, yo, Dave, I got to step out for a meeting. He's like, you just came back from lunch.
Right.
And I'm like, lunch? Like, yo, Jay-Z's label just called me.
Right.
And he's like, who's Jay-Z? And I'm like, oh, Dave. And at this point,
Shout out to Dave.
He's just giving me a hard time at this point. But he's like, go ahead.
So he knew who Jay-Z was.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's like, go ahead, do what you got to do. So, I go in, and they're like, yo, listen, we'll be straight up. Like, we want to start a production team of people to keep in-house.
Very smart.
Can you play us some more music? So I played him a few things. And I think it was just me and G, and I think maybe hip-hop might have come in the room for a bit. So I played him some more music. And then they were like, are you available for a meeting tonight or within the next couple of nights? So they come by the crib. And they kind of just laid out the plan. Like, yo, we want you, this dude, Rock Wilder. Remember K-Rob and Ramel Z, Beat Bop?
Yeah.
K-Rob had started making beats or not making beats, but he was making a comeback on the production side of things. And this new kid, Kanye West. We would love for y'all to be the core of this team. So that was pretty much it from there. Like, we actually never signed a contract. I was never actually signed. It was just a partnership that made sense for everybody.
Yeah.
Ye signed when it like became time to do the artist thing. And for me, it was basically just a situation where I cut my teeth in that crew with a mill. So like I was basically like the man overseeing her project from recording, helping out with production on other people's records. I produced a record or two myself. And during this time, and I told the story a billion times, like, Jay wasn't really paying me much mind yet until Bathgate had a record that we were going to feature a mill on. Hove heard it and was like, he pulled the
Hove card.
Yeah, he pulled the OG card and was like, nah, we need that for a mill. We'll give Bath his publishing, and his piece of the record, but he took Bath's spot on the record, and that became a record called That's Right. And when the record was done, he's like, yo, who did the joint? I'm like, oh, the kid Just. He was like, oh, word? All right. Send him over to come meet me at Baseline. And I gave him a cassette with 2 beats on it, and that was kind of the start of everything.
Now, I don't remember when I met you, but it had to be around this time.
I would say it was a little bit before that.
While you were at Cutting Room?
Yeah, I was definitely at Cutting Room. Most was working on his album.
This is Dreadlock Just Blaze.
Yeah, definitely Dreadlock Just Blaze.
Young Dreadlocks. I remember seeing you at the Cutting Room and being like, yeah, that's Justin.
Right.
That's the guy who engineers at the Cutting Room.
Right.
But did we ever work on a session together?
No, well, no. I used to see you coming and going a lot. Funny enough, like Sean J. Period took a liking to me early. And that happened through Matt. through Matt Fingers. Yes,
everything happens.
Everything happens through Matt Fingers.
Yeah.
So like, I spoke to Sean once, and then I guess he realized that Matt and I were friends. So he actually hit Matt like, "Yo, can you make an actual intro?" Like, I dig dude. Like, he didn't even know my music. He just kind of liked my energy.
Right.
So that's how we started to chop it up. And then also Eight, yeah, because Eight was doing some work for y'all, and I think he was working with Farside a bit on that second or something after the second album. Right. But like Eight and Sean were like the first two producers who were quote unquote on at the time to kind of give me the time of day.
That's beautiful. So that's my crew.
Right. So I would see Eight and
that's
be like,
two people who on a Black Star album.
Right. I would see Eight and kind of just, like, like, yo, like, so how did you end up here? Like, how'd you get on? Like, what was your journey? What was your path? And like, he would sit down and chop it up with me about it. And same with Sean. And those are two relationships that I still have to this day. Those are two of my favorite people. Right. And Sean just has like real pure energy to him.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, Sean J. Period is interesting because at that time he was doing records with Yasin Bey.
Right.
And he was sampling and playing.
Right.
But then he's very spiritual, very Christian dude. Mm-hmm. And he had a vision where he was like, yo, I was told by my Lord and Savior that sampling is stealing.
Yep.
And then we used to have real deep conversations about this, but he made his choice. And so he's like, yo, I'm not going to sample no more. And it changed the way he produced. That's where Children's Story comes from.
Right.
It's like one of the first, as far as I know, it might have been before that, but that's one of the first beats I heard from where I'm like, okay, like you're sticking with this non-sampling.
And you're starting to figure it out. Yeah. The funny thing is so the benefit on my end was I ended up with his record collection.
So Jesus gave you Sean J. Period's records.
He had me.
They're for Just Blaze.
He had me come out to a warehouse somewhere way out in Red Hook, like in the middle of a thunderstorm. But he's like, "Yo, just come with a van."
He gave you the records because Jesus said you can't sample. So this is like a crazy part of your origin story.
Yeah. So like if you come to my house to this day, I have a wall about this size, floor to ceiling records. And a good amount of that came from Sean's warehouse.
Shout out to Sean J. Period.
Indeed.
Word is bond. Let's talk a little bit about the homie Memphis Bleek.
Okay.
You were the chief really producer on that Made album, I feel
right.
like. And Jay-Z famously said Bleek could be one hit away his whole career. How important was Bleek, not just to Jay-Z, but to the vibe at Roc-A-Fella?
Bleek was the glue in a lot of ways. If that makes sense, that like, he was always motivated, always in the studio, always working. A lot of other guys, they would come and go. Their work ethic might not have always been there. He was diligent. He was the early bird. So like 10 a.m., like clockwork. Bleek was the reason I started learning how to survive with no sleep. Because I'd be
sleeping in the studio. Because
I'd be finishing a bean. Like beans might not show up till 2 in the morning, right? So beans would pass out on the couch by 8. So that's when I'm going to go to take a nap. And then Bleek would show up 10 a.m. ready to work. But like his motivation was different. Like I think that was kind of his gift and his curse because every day, like I have to admire this, but we used to sometimes bump heads because every day it was, we got to make the hit single today. We got to make another hit single today. And I'm like, bro, no, let's just make the records. The hit record will come, right? But he was so intent on just having hit after hit after hit.
I feel like he really needed, because it's like, the story, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jay put him on that record, the Coming of Age record.
Right.
Really set him up with that, set him up on that record.
Right.
But then really pulled him out the street and sort of saved his life with that.
Right.
So for Bleek, and for a lot of people who were around Roc-A-Fella at that time, it was life or death. It's not just like we rapping for fun. It's like, no, I got people to... And I remember watching the Hard Knock Life film, and in that movie, Bleek was kind of like moving... It seemed like he's like moving away from the spotlight in that movie. Like, I got... My man's just passed away. I got to take care of my man's kid now. Like, Bleek always seemed like he was stunting.
Right.
On the mic, he was loud.
Right.
Stunting.
Right.
I get the girls, I got the jewelry. I'm a street dude. But when you be around him and when you meet him, when you see him, seemed like he had a different purpose than to be in the industry.
Yeah, nah. And like even it's funny that you say that, because even like I remember, one of the first big things that he and I were going to do together was a Bleak and Beans album. We're gonna do that together. We went down to Miami to do the album. His brother ended up having a near fatal motorcycle crash.
Wow.
Like serious head trauma. He had to go to therapy for a long time and almost didn't make it. So I feel like that kind of derailed the momentum of that. Like, can you imagine, like, in 2002, what a Bleak and Beans joint album
That would have been crazy.
would have done?
Yeah.
Like, and once that accident happened, we tried to still push through the album, but I could just tell mentally, his brother's in a bad place, so he had to handle that, but he always persevered, always pushed through, and every once in a while would still give you one.
That Rock the Mic song is a perfect example of that synergy.
Right.
Like Cameron was just starting to be around the crew at that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that song sounds like, because Cam's verse goes last, but that song sounds like what that album could have been.
You're talking about Just Fire.
I was not Rock the Mic. Yeah, just Fire. That's what I meant.
So that energy is what we were going for, like a whole album of that. And it was a lot of high energy, up tempo, loud, in your face music. But just it wasn't lining up. Like, again, it wasn't lack of talent, obviously, on anybody's part. It was just the timing. But the funny thing, I shouldn't say the funny, but the interesting thing about that time is what started out as the sessions that were supposed to be Bleak and Beans ended up becoming the state property orchard.
Right.
So, because as that project wasn't working out, Mac was flying in folks from Philly sometimes as they came home, like, oh, he's out.
Bring him to the studio.
Fly him down to Miami, because we were all living in Miami at the time.
Right.
So, like, that's how that whole state property album got made, was him just systematically bringing dudes down.
That's crazy. I remember around that era, or shortly after that era, Hot Tech hit me up. He was like, yo, I'll be on the phone with Beanie Mac.
Right.
Siegel. He wanted, we might do some work together. And him and Hot Tech did a song on the Lyricist Lounge too, but around that time, right? But I never forget this. Hot Tech put me on the phone with him.
Right.
He's like, what up, scrap? And all a bunch of scraps.
Right.
And it was whatever legal situation he was like, I was like, let's get up. He's like, I gotta get in I have to be inside by a certain time.
Right.
It was at that era. And then I'm talking to him and he's asking me like for features. He starts asking me for money, but it didn't sound right. I'm talking. And I'm like, this ain't Beanie Siegel.
I was gonna say that don't sound like his.
Beanie Siegel. And I told her, I remember telling her, that's not whoever you talking to, bro.
Right.
I've been talking to dude for 3 months. And I called Dame, and I related the story to Dame, and he was like, "That's
definitely not
that's not him."
Yeah,
that's not that. Yeah,
Mac fishing.
Mac fishing.
Did you ever find out who it was?
No, but the dude was like, "What up, scrap?" And he was like, and this is not the only time this happened to me in my career. This also happened to me with Akon. I've told that story many times. The fake Akon, I call him Fakon.
It's like Jay Pharoah with the Jay-Z job.
Yeah, but if you have the details and you when I was on the phone with the fake Akon, everything that was happening in Akon's life, this dude was on the phone saying
talking about it, right?
And then he asked me for some money.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
And why would Akon be asking you for money?
Why would Akon be asking for money?
Exactly. That's when I knew the jig was up.
Wow.
I wonder if this really happened, but back in the day, I was watching Reign as a TV show about the Queen of Scots. And they had like a Queen of Scotland and the Prince like going around acting as if they were the Queen.
Oh no, that absolutely happened, especially in the music business. In the movie Cadillac Records, there's a scene where Little Walter shoots somebody for being a fake Little Walter. But that was happening all the time, like because those acts, no one knew what they looked like. So you just get 5 guys in a suit, who could just do that, and that's the Temptations tonight.
I got a dude, or
a good one.
We caught a dude doing that, like posing as me. Somebody called Baseline one night asking for me. And I get on the phone and he starts asking about the tracks that he was supposed to be receiving. And I'm like, who are you? What are you talking about? So I'm on the phone with this dude for at first I'm thinking it's a prank call, because we used to get a lot of prank calls. I'm about to hang up. And then I realized this is somebody who actually got hustled. And had paid somebody somewhere around $25,000.
What?
For music.
Wow.
And the guy was somewhere in the Midwest. I forget exactly where.
That definitely sounds like catfish.
But
that's definitely a catfish.
I feel like I've seen this catfish episode.
But then it gets better. It gets better. I remember it's me, my engineer Andy, and Jay Electronica. So I feel terrible for the dude. I get his information. I'm like, yo, if I can figure out, if I get any information, I'll help you sort this out. 5 minutes later, somebody calls the studio yelling, "Who the fuck is this? Who the fuck is this answering my phone?" And I'm like, "What? Yo, this is Justin Smith."
He was the government.
The dude, no, but what it was he was calling the studio. He had the guy on the phone.
He called him three-way.
He called Baseline pretending to be me, barking on people for playing games. But he doesn't realize that it's actually me
there.
That he's barking
at. So the dude went on for about 20 minutes, and he took turns yelling at me and Jay Electronica and Andy.
This is fucking hilarious.
And Jay Electronica kept calling him James Flames.
Just Blaze and James Flames.
Yeah. So he was like, "Yo, I'm gonna be there." He said, "As soon as I get out this session, I'm on my way over there. Somebody's gonna have to pay for this. Somebody's getting fired." And at this point, we're just laughing at the dude. But at the same time, I feel so terrible for this dude who, I don't know what his financial circumstances are, but he put out all that money and got
Just Blaze.
Right, and got scammed.
And you're saying you're in the studio with Jay Electronica, so at this point you really you that guy.
Yeah, this is like 2009-ish.
So did you give him the beats for free?
Nah, but I did tell the dude, I said, if you ever find your way into New York, you're welcome to come by Baseline.
Come hang out.
Yeah, like just come chop it up, play us some music. If I could do something for you, I will. I never heard from the dude again.
No, that's fair.
But I did extend that invite.
That's really fucked up.
Yeah.
So you developed a vocal signature, Just Blaze.
Yes, I did.
Did I do that right?
Yes, you did.
Awesome. So everyone knows it except for that dude that was in the Never Been Loved video. Everyone else knows it. What did that mean for your career?
I mean, so I've written for people. I've helped people write. I never had the desire to be an artist because I just never had the proper breath control for it. But I could write like crazy, but eventually I had to kind of, back when we were young, that, we come from the era where it was like, you didn't just rap, you didn't just DJ, you did it all, right? So me and my brother both did it all. Some things he did better than I and vice versa. And one day when he was like 14, he woke up and said this rhyme, and I realized I never needed to rap again because he had that, but I had the beats. So ever since that, I always still wrote, but I just never, there was really no way for me to like do like a Dre or a Ye or a Pharrell where I could come out with my own album as a performer or an artist, but I still needed to brand myself somehow. That threshold is about to be crossed. I can already tell what's about to happen. I'm working with artists of a higher caliber. Records are starting to chart, and nobody knows who's doing them. Outside of like music nerds, nobody's really reading credits like that. So I had to come up with something, a way to just kind of brand myself. So it went through a few different iterations. At first, sometimes it would just be the artist shouting me out. Like, I think Emil was the first to do it. Killer Priest had done it a few times. But there was no consistency. It would just be like, Just Blaze, whatever. Just Blaze on a beat, whatever.
That's just nervous rapper energy, just trying to psych yourself up for the track.
Exactly. Yeah. And then sometimes I would ask Emil, can you give me a shout out? People would generally do it. But I knew that there needed to be something consistent and signature. So the way it came about, we're in the Pump It Up session.
Oh, love that song.
And if you remember, right? So if you remember, so that was the first time
that's the ooh era of Joey.
Right. Oh. So like, if you remember, his previous record was Focus. And if you remember in that record, he had that one part where he would break down what they would do on different days of the week. So they were like Mondays, Tuesdays. So when we finished Pump It Up, I was like, I did the same thing. Like, yo, would you mind shouting me out in the beginning of the record? He's like, do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, just do it. Like, I don't want to be the voice. Just you say my name. So I didn't know what else to do, but I had focus on the brain.
Right.
So I would pause. So I was just like, Mondays, Just Blaze. And that was it. And then it just took off. Like, I was going to change it again, but that record got so big, it was like, I have to keep that now.
So for me, that was the first time that, okay, so I recognized that, there was the random shout outs, but I didn't really know it was a producer.
Nobody did. That was the funny
Blaze,
part. Right.
It's like, all you knew is you heard Just Blaze is about to be some fire to
I used to
time to smoke.
Right. I used to get that a lot. Like, people didn't realize that it was a person. They just thought that it was something cool
phrase,
that rappers were saying at the beginning of records. And then the other thing that I had to deal with, and I guess it's because we have a similar vocal tone, for many years a lot of people thought that it was Swiss saying it.
Yeah, because he puts on a certain voice on records.
Right. And if you like, I remember like back in the day on Twitter, it would say like at Just Blaze Swiss Beats voice.
And the asterisk, which we were talking about.
Right, and the asterisk,
too.
right. And I'd be sitting there like, it's not Swiss.
Right.
It's me. So are you like the first producer to start doing that?
So some of us have had this conversation, a bunch of producers.
I was the first Soulja Boy voice.
had this conversation a few years back, and we were actually trying to figure out
who was the first beat tag?
If I was the first. And from what we can ascertain, all right, so Puff was obviously doing ad-libs on records.
But we didn't know
but
who
it wasn't
TDJ or any of it was.
But like Puff and Pete Rock were doing ad-libs on records.
You recognize Pete's voice.
Right. But
and
in terms
Puff
of
he was in all his artists' videos.
Right. But in terms of
all in
the videos, come to Death Row.
All on the song. Well, I don't know why he felt like he had to lean all. If you don't want your CEO leaning all in the mic.
He was just spitting COVID all in the mic. Just,
I probably was the first, it looks like, to have an actual vocal tag. But then after that conversation was over, and there was a lot of us that were engaged in this conversation, all trying to figure out who had it first. But the one thing that I thought of one thing before me, but it wasn't vocal. Rashad Smith, the dice roll.
Dice.
Right, the dice roll.
Yeah.
And he didn't do that for a long time, but there was a brief phase where he was doing that, like before the Rampage records. He didn't do it before any of the Biggie or Puff records, but he did do it in a couple of the records that were outside of Bad Boy. So he might have been the first to have an audible tag. I think mine was the first one where the name was actually said loud and prominent.
Amen.
By the time I started like really putting out records at a furious pace, most producers were putting beat tags on their beats, like, you know, and whoever I was working with, I was taking the bitches right off. You know what I'm saying? Definitely, because I was like, this is the Talib Kweli album, and this is one song on the album and it has to fit in this and that. I wasn't trying to make it look like compilation.
Right. Well, see, so here's the thing is, it also is a matter of what makes sense for the song, right? So, like, I did adapt at certain times. Like, on Never Been in Love Before, I didn't do it. But you have a small, slight one. Where you just kind of say it quickly, like, Just Blaze.
Yeah. See, I wanted to say it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, because it also became a cool thing. At a certain point, sometimes I wouldn't put it on a record, and artists would be like, yo, where's the Just Blaze drop? Like, it became a thing.
Yeah.
And you know I've been liking your arm because I didn't hear it in Freedom.
Well, I was going to say, so that, no, that wasn't on there. Carl Thomas, My First Love, there's a whisper. Because it's a love song. You don't want to have...
You're trying to make love to your woman,
your sex,
and then you hear Just
Blaze.
Blaze.
Like, you're trying to pump to that.
You're trying to make love to your woman.
The one time that it was taken off, they took it off of... And I never really understood this. They took it off of Fab's Breathe.
A Breathe?
They took it off.
It's not on Breathe?
But Breathe... That is signature Just Blaze. Like,
right. And that was kind of their thing. And I'm like, or you could just leave my drop on.
Or you could just leave my drop.
I think that definitely fits Breathe.
And it wasn't like a thing where it was like, I always did it strategically where it never interfered. I always did two things. I always made sure it never interfered with the artist's lyrics. And I always made sure that it was in a good place for DJs to backspin.
But I really like, and I need to thank you for the records we did together, because Hostile Gospel, one of my favorite records, Never Been in Love. These are staples in my career. And these don't, people are surprised to find out that you did these records.
Right.
They don't sound like what people think a Just Blaze record would sound like.
Sometimes when you work with artists outside of your usual stable, or people that you're known for working with, you kind of have the freedom to be able to go left. Like, if you look at a lot of my records that sound really different, most of those were done with artists who are outside of my normal wheelhouse. You know, because at Roc-A-Fella, we very much had a specific sound and energy. We could go different places, but it kind of still fell under that same umbrella.
Yeah.
So I was able to get with you. Like, think about it, like, who on Roc-A-Fella could I have given Hostile Gospel to? You know what I mean? Like, just sonically, it wasn't in line. As dope as Breathe was, it wasn't really in line, you know, or like an Exhibit C, you know, maybe Hove, but that probably would have probably really been it, you know, like, so that was the great thing about, you know, obviously I had to deal with them, but I wasn't locked down by them. I was still able to go out and explore other facets of what I wanted to do musically.
So where does Young Guru come into that process?
So Guru was like, again, he's another guy like who I would call the glue of the overall situation, right? So like Goo would be the one to cross my T's and dot my I's. Like, especially if I'm at a point where I'm working on 7 records at once. So it's like, you know, the way I produce, I'm kind of mixing it as I'm creating the song. So when I give it to him, it's probably like 80% there. But what Goo was good at, especially, my frequencies tend to be over the top, especially when it comes to the highs and the high mids. And what we were able to figure out a way to do was to make it so that the records physically didn't hurt your ears, because I use a lot of high frequency stuff, but also how to get those high frequency sounds to fit in with the vocals. 'Cause a lot of times I've used a lot of instruments that would also be in the same frequency range as the vocals. So that's what really what he was the master of. Like, if it wasn't for him, my records, they generally sound good when I do my mixes, but he's able to make them accessible. That's what it is. And that was something that I still to this day sometimes struggle with. Like, I still had to be mindful of the times where I would have to watch him dial 12K down a bit, or like around, you know, somewhere between 12 and 10, like create gaps physically in the frequencies to allow the vocals to breathe, no pun intended. But on top of that, even outside of that, you know, like Goo was really the glue that held a lot of the operation together. You know, like, you know, we were both archiving, keeping track of sessions, even if they weren't my records. You know, we were kind of the ones that were still just keeping track of everything, of where everything was. You got to remember, this is also the beginning of things going 100% digital. So it's easy to just have files laying around on computers left and right and things not being organized. So he was really the glue of that situation, aside from being able to tame my wild high-end frequencies, really.
Word up.
His creative input would always be super invaluable too. Like,
I know that's right.
Yeah, like a lot of times there were records that we kind of either, again, even if it wasn't my beat, or it might not even be a record that he's mixing, because he didn't come in as a mix engineer, right? But we would still be the one either coaching the artist, you know, or making creative decisions on these records, because we knew what the overall Roc-A-Fella vision was.
Right.
So we would have to kind of, you know, even if it wasn't my record, I'm still coming in there like, turn this down, fix this, fix this. He's still the one like kind of A&Ring, you know, or vocal coaching the artist and pulling the best out of them. And I think that was probably his most important role.
He's an incredible vocal coach. I've worked with him. And that's a very good skill set to have.
Right.
Now, you know, we have a lot of friends in common, Paul Smith, and I did this party in Austin with Paul. And shout out to DJ Furno. I was a couple of months ago. It's a monthly party called Last Tuesdays. I was like, I'm gonna start with what we do.
Right.
And Furno's from Philly.
Right.
And I was like, yo,
Furno's from Philly? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was like, he's gonna love it because he's from Philly.
Right.
And he's about to go off before I go on, and he goes on what we do. And I was like, damn, I can't play it.
Damn.
But then, you know, I was DJing for 2-3 hours. 2-3 hours later, fuck it, I'm gonna
play it again, yeah.
And so when I play it, the girls particularly really respond to this record in a different way.
There's something about that
record.
Yes. And it's funny, like, at least once a week I get a text from somebody like, yo, I'm at the Sixers game, and you know, halftime starts, the first thing that they play is what we do, or the game opens and the first thing they play is what we do. And that record has transcended time and kind of has become like the anthem of, or one of the city anthems, which is amazing, because that record almost didn't happen.
Wow.
Tell us about it. And because I also feel like it's the beat, of course, but it's also what Freeway was doing.
Yes. No, so that beat, I made it, chopped up the tempo, did the beat, and it was one of those things where it's like, because of the repetitive nature of it and the off-kilterness of it, it's one of those things where you're like, this is either one of the most amazing things I've ever did, or it's terrible. I kind of erred on the side of it being terrible. So Free walked in, and I rarely like never save anything. I wasn't even gonna save it. So like Free walks in the room, and he's doing his, you know, Free has the triplet nod. Like, he doesn't do this. It's a triplet nod.
A triplet.
Triplet nod.
So he starts doing that immediately. Meanwhile, my fingers are already on the power button. So if I let go of the button, that's it. It's over. So I think we called Dave, shout out to Dave Brown. It was either Dave or Shane, I forget, to come in and just take a 2-track of what was coming out of the MP and out of the 2080.
And your hands started still.
And my hand's sitting on the button. So they took a 2-track down, they vocaled it, or Free vocaled it. Jay kind of let us, but that album specifically, he really let me, Free and Goo just do us. Like, we weren't really micromanaged on that album at all. I kind of remember Jay coming to like 3 sessions total. One of which was the first time he came to a session was to check in where things were at. So we played him everything that we had at that point. And I want to say the second to last record we played him was What We Do. And he heard that. And, it's only Free's verse. Mm-hmm. So when Free's verse is over, he stopped, looked at us like, yo, where's the rest? Like, what is this? And I'm like, yo, it's just something we didn't even have. Like, we weren't even sure if we were going to use it. Jay was like, nah, pull that back up. And he started doing that thing where he paces back and forth. Right. And that's when we realized, oh, he's getting on this.
Hove never slacking, man.
Right. Got in, knocked it out like, as usual, one take, kills it. And then it lived like that for a while, but just them two. And then we did another follow-up session where Lior was coming to listen. Remember I said it was only like 3 meetings where like the label showed up. So I want to say this, if it was Lior coming, then this had to be like the last meeting. Or the last label check-in, I should say. And Mac came that day. Mac wasn't at the meeting where Hove was. And at that point, it was like the given, like Free's on it, Hove's on it, so Mac has to get on it. Mm-hmm. And then we took it to Quad to mix it, and I made the beat over at Quad because I had never had a proper tracked version.
Right, you
of
just
it.
had a 2-track at that
Right,
point.
so I made the beat over at Quad at the mix. And to be honest, that was a blessing because originally it didn't start out with the ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba. It started out with none of that. It was just the right into the so that having to do it over is actually what gave the record the extra sauce it needed. As part of that record is also the way it starts. Mm-hmm. Like the hype that the energy that's built up from the beginning. If you don't have that, it might not be the same record at all.
Right.
So we did the record over that night, and we kind of knew off top. Like by the time Mac had gone and did what he did, we knew it was something special.
Soulful Sundays.
Yeah.
Y'all was really doing that, right?
Yeah. But I didn't think that it was going to be a thing where 20 years later, it still rings off. Like that's one of the records in my catalog that when I play it, it rings off like it did when it came out.
It never stopped.
Right. And across, not even just across eras, but across demographics. Like I've played shows where it's like, this might be more of an EDM crowd, but because of the way that record builds, it almost builds like an EDM record.
Right.
So it kind of almost, it still lends itself to that build, drop that they're used to with that, with that music. So that record is a blessing, man.
Yeah, real quick, take us behind the mango meat sample that you use on Rock the Mic, because for me that was always straight out the jungle.
Right.
And you took it and owned it and made it something else.
It was, to be honest, that was really the start of me and Free's relationship. And I think the more interesting story, or for me, the interesting part of that story is really how it came about and why that record happened. That record, I won't say the artist's name, but there was a certain set of artists at the time that because they were now around Roc-A-Fella felt entitled.
Okay.
In terms of like, we're here now, where's my beats?
Did you say a certain set of artists?
No, it wasn't Dipset. Because they didn't come out until...
I'm trying to get the clues.
No, because they gotta remember, they came later.
Right.
So, when I say set, I mean like a certain number of artists.
I get it. I know what you mean.
Who were there, who kind of like really treated me like I owed them something. Again, I'm not talking about Cam. I know he has the just plays you owe me thing. But it was really like, and I kind of really just didn't appreciate that. I'm like, yo, y'all just got here. We are working on like 6 albums at once. There's an order here. There's an order and there's priorities here. Now, at the time, I don't even know if Free actually officially even had a deal yet, right? But this was during that Bleak and Beans trip. Free, who technically, like I said, might not have even been signed, just approached me super humble, like the exact opposite of what I had been dealing with from some other people. But meanwhile, what he didn't even know was like 2 hours earlier, I had just had a huge argument with another artist who was acting very entitled. And I appreciated his humility so much.
He was at the right place at the right time.
Right. I was like, yo, you know what? I got you. And I had, what was the machine I had with me in Miami? The ASRX. And the Jungle Brothers was always a favorite record of mine. So I was like, yo. And tapped it out less than 5 minutes. And then I took inspiration from, you remember Fantasy 3, It's Your Rock? You will. Hold on.
Oh yeah, I just didn't know the name of it.
So if you listen to that, listen to the hi-hat.
Yeah.
The way the hi-hat is jumping up and down with the flanger.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite records of all time. And just to divert very quickly, my cousin, the one who I keep referencing, that record was at the same time as Crash Crew on the radio.
This is something for the radio.
Right, and they both had the same backing music. So that was like my first time ever seeing two turntables play at the same time in person. Was my cousin was like, yo, listen to on the radio, now listen to Fantasy 3. And I'm just tripping off the fact that like, I'm like 5, like, oh my God, it's the same beat and they're rapping on it. So that hi-hat pattern has always been in the back of my head. One day I want to use it for something. So to be honest, Free was in the right place at the right time. I had the right ideas, the right records with me, put it together, and left. Me and Goo, I think, we either went to the club or went back to the condo. And it was late. It was like 5 a.m. Free had the whole record done by 10 a.m. We came downstairs at the condo, and everybody's at the pool having like a little early morning pool party. I think they had just been up all night partying. But the record is blasting over and over, and I'm like, yo, because I had just given him the beat down long ago.
It's hungry.
And like the record that you hear is the record that he did. It wasn't like an early demo version or he went and cleaned it up. No, what you hear is what he did.
It does sound raw. He sounds raw on that record.
Right. And I want to say, he did 2 verses. And it was only a 2-verse record. Mac heard it and was like, I have to get on this.
Yeah.
And it was one of those, sometimes you have like a record that you're not sure about. Like what we do, we weren't necessarily sure right away, right? Rock the mic as soon as it was done. Before it was even done, we knew what it was.
Word. Yeah, that's a great record, man. Let's talk about a little bit before we continue the Blueprint era.
Okay.
Kanye on the documentary, brilliant documentary, Cootie. There's footage in there.
Right.
Of Kanye saying that you are his arch nemesis.
Right. Right.
Now, Kanye talked about me on Drink Champs. He talked about you on Drink Champs. We talked a little bit about it. But talk about Kanye West in that era.
Right. So it was, I could see why he would look at it as the arch nemesis thing. And I guess it kind of was that because a lot of times the arch nemesis, you have 2 arch nemesis, nemesis, right?
Nemesis.
They're a lot of times they're actually guys that are friends.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you look at most of the classic superhero stories.
Yeah.
There's a friendship there, right? Or a mutual respect or whatever you want to call it.
Brothers.
Right. So like it was, some people like to spin the narrative of, it was super competitive. They were out there duking it out. I honestly never looked at it like that. Like he would call me to ask me like, yo, how did you get your horns to sound like this on this record? I'm trying to figure that out, right? Or like I'd have a sample up or I'd have like a chop up on the MP, in my room, and he'd come in and just start tapping on the pads like, yo, you should flip it like this, or use this snare, or like if he needed a snare for a record, he hit me, or if he needed, a set of drums for a record, he would hit me. So like it was never a thing where it was like I was trying to hold something back from him or hold back his progress. And I don't think neither was he. There were definitely times where like I'd go in the room and be like, oh man, like I got to go back.
Right.
But that's like motivation more than anything else, because he didn't come through often. I was there every day.
It was you were running the studio,
right?
Owning the studio at this
right.
point.
So I didn't own it yet.
Okay.
But I had my own room there. But like I would be there often, so it was nothing for me to. I think he said something to the effect of, this guy's making 4 or 5 records a day. I think he made some comment along those lines in the documentary. But what that really was it was because I was there 24/7. At least 6 days a week. But his thing is he would show up occasionally, but when he did show up on those occasions, he would just have a bag full of bombs.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the thing for me,
He was
because
making
like,
it at crib in Jersey.
right. So for me, it was like a lot of the artists got to witness my hits and misses because they had the freedom, the ability to just walk into a room, peek their head, and
That's
pause and stumble across something that I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas he had more so had the opportunity to tailor it. So that was his way of making an impact.
Mm-hmm.
His way of making an impact was coming through nothing but short shots. Mine was the access.
Right.
And that's why I was doing sometimes 4 or 5 records a day.
Right.
But the relationship, was always a good one. It was always mutually inspirational. We remained, fairly close, and we would, talk fairly often through the second album. And then I think the third is where we started to fall out of touch, not because there was an issue, but just because our careers just went in different directions.
Same with me. It's around that same time.
Right.
Yeah. Whatever he was doing, he was starting to think about starting a family, having his own outside of Roc-A-Fella.
Exactly. He was just in a different place.
Yeah.
It's funny that when you're speaking, you're like, yeah, this song was da-da-da-da, this song. It's like early 2000s, that was my time. Like high school, college, like, so all of your songs like really like hit me. Like that's like my childhood of things that I remember when I started listening to more so my own music and not my parents' music.
Right.
Girls, Girls, Girls is, it's one of my theme songs. It's like the theme song of my life. So I absolutely love it. Can you take us through going through that? And you have Jay-Z, you have Biz, Slick Rick, and Q-Tip. So why did you pick those features, and why is it so important to have an amazing rap voice?
So that was actually one of the first records recorded for the Blueprint. And, we had been talking about, the Blueprint sound kind of really started to take place on Bean's second album, On The Reason. The Blueprint is kind of like the culmination of what we were starting to figure out on The Dynasty and On The Reason. Hop would tell you himself, hip-hop, A&R at the time, Ghostface was his favorite rapper. Mm-hmm. So we were all definitely influenced by Supreme Clientele specifically.
Your record with Ghostface is amazing.
Thank you. I had actually, when we were in that chamber, I had actually made Girls, Girls, Girls for Ghost.
What?
I could hear that.
Right.
I could hear it.
About a year and a half before the Blueprint was ever a thought, that beat was already done.
But it wasn't Girls, Girls, Girls.
No, it wasn't called. It was just an instrumental. We had already, like I said, been moving in that soulful lane. My intention was always to give that beat to Ghost. Mm-hmm. And then Jay that fateful day that Jay came in with the CD from Ye, like, yo, I'm about to start rapping. Like, he wasn't scheduled to rap for like another, like, he would give us a timeline, like, yo, I'll be back in May, whatever. I don't remember what the date was, but I remember him walking in one day like, yo, I just got this CD from Ye, let's go. So I'm like, what we doing? He's like, we back to the soul music. So the first thing I think of is that Ghost beat. And I don't have, at that time, I don't know, Ghost is my brother now. At the time, I didn't have a link to Ghost. I didn't know him like that. So I can hold out and pray that I get to meet Ghost one day, or this is the chamber that Jay's in right now, boom.
Yeah.
So gave him the record, and what he would do is he would just come back and keep adding on more and more. Like, he would do like a half a verse, move on to something else, come back to another half a verse. And I want to say we started on a Friday. By Sunday, those core songs were all done. So like most of my stuff, most of Ye's stuff was done between Friday and Sunday.
You're saying the Blueprint album was mostly recorded over a weekend?
Wow.
Yeah, Friday to Sunday.
Okay.
Wow.
So you look at,
I just didn't make sure that's what I heard.
Yeah. Like, things were tweaked here and there, but my records and the Ye records were done in that first weekend.
Wow.
Then, Trackmasters, Tim, Bink, and everybody else, they came in like right after that weekend.
But you and Ye are really the heart of that record. And that doesn't take away from anybody else.
No, it doesn't take away from anybody else, no. So back to your question about the features, because of the feel of the record, we wanted it to be familiar voices that even at that time were kind of like old school voices. Like Tip, they were all still around making records, but they were voices that had been on records for years. And we definitely wanted some familiarity, and we wanted it to feel like hip hop. Because if you remember, we were just coming out of that keyboard beat phase, the Triton and the Trinity and the 2080 and whatnot. So it was definitely a clear ode to a different, or a conscious ode to a different time and a different sound. Like we knew what we were about to do. As that album started to take shape, we knew that we were about to change things sonically.
Yeah.
So it was really it wasn't a coincidence that we got those three artists.
Word. I think that you are very adept and very dope at like soul samples. Obviously, you know what I'm saying? Like you're one of the goats of it. As annoying and frustrated as I could get with Ye,
Right.
I definitely have to give him props for being so consistent with that style at that time.
For sure.
That people started, like, for you to say he came in with the beats, like, let's go. I had the same experience when Kanye gave me a beat CD.
Right.
I hadn't heard nothing like that since Hot Tech.
Right.
So I was like, okay, let's go.
Let's
like,
go,
those were
right.
the last 4 records of that quality. I'm like, nah, the album's done now.
Right.
Now, Kanye talks about the main ingredient being hugely inspirational.
I never knew that.
The Pete Rock joint.
Because that album is one of the reasons that I do what I do. I never knew that about him.
This is what I find, Justin. I want to ask you about this because I find that MCs like Mecca and the Soul Brother, producers like Main Ingredient.
Mecca and the Soul Brother is cool. Respectfully, Mecca and the Soul Brother is cool. And I'm saying that jokingly with love.
Yes,
like,
I know what you mean.
But like, there have been times, like I remember one night we had a battle royale at Baseline.
Are those records?
I don't remember who else was there. I remember Len was there, Lenny S. Shout out to Lenny S. But it was like a mob of us. And I'm like the one dude dying on the Main Ingredient hill.
Main Ingredient.
So I went and got the iPod or the CDs or whatever and played both of them back to back, key song for key song. And by the time I was done with my dissertation, nobody could argue with me.
Nobody could argue. So this question I asked you, you got the data. You're not just answering. Like, you're like, no, I've done a scientific study.
Yeah, no, like, no, we can break this down. Like,
you went to grad school for this shit.
You know what's funny about that album? You know, because it wasn't hugely successful, right? At this point, I'm not just a fan anymore. Like, I'm the aspiring producer. I'm a working DJ. So I'm not catching albums necessarily right when they come out. What was that, like 95, I think, maybe? So I was late to the album. I had the singles. I was late to the album. And one of the homies used to work at a record shop right near campus at Rutgers. And I would come, shout out to Derek, rest in peace. I would come through and he would literally just mark, and no matter what I was buying, he would mark it down to $1. So it could be a double album, whatever. So I would just go there every day and just rack up $100. I'm walking out with 100 records.
Yeah.
So I realized I had never gotten the Main Ingredient. Copped it. And it quite literally, as a young producer, changed my life probably more so than any other body of work from that era.
I think what was happening there was CL Smooth has a very specific rhyme style.
Right.
That, you know, it's a thing that he's doing. And it comes from, CL Smooth was like marrying, Clark Kent talked about how when Rakim came out, it changed from like rap into rhyming. It's like, dudes rhyming like this. And then it became a different style.
Right.
I feel like CL Smooth style is right in between there. Like he's still got this old school thing happening, but he's rhyming on these new age, at that time,
New age production, yes.
Right? And it's like this marriage of, it's still one foot in what we know rap to be, but now it's like the future.
Right.
And CL, his last name was Smooth.
Right.
So I think he fashioned himself, he saw himself as a smooth guy.
Right.
But hip hop was moving more hardcore lyrically.
Right.
The lyrical subject was moving more hardcore in 95. Pete Rock was stepping up with the beat. So he was more refined on Main Ingredient, but CL was rhyming basically about women.
Right.
So I feel like that's what was the disconnect.
Right.
So you're listening to the beats. You know
but see, here's the thing is, to me, I find, and one of the things that I love, and I talk about this in interviews all the time, is unorthodox juxtapositions. It's one of the reasons why I like a record like It Ain't Hard to Tell is my favorite song of all time. Because you have this beautiful Michael Jackson, and what's his name from Toto? I can't remember his name, pardon, off the top of my head, but this beautiful arrangement, super duper pretty, but then you had the super hard boom, boom, cat, boom, boom. They shouldn't work together,
right? But
they do. And then you have Nas talking what he's talking on it. It's just these, to me, what some people would, I don't think anybody would call that record a disconnect, but when I look at it from a technical standpoint, it's very disconnected. But it all works somehow. So to me, going to your point about with what CL was talking about, it might have been disconnected from the content that was becoming popular at that time. But to me, I loved the fact that you had these hard, technically advanced beats, but he was in a whole different pocket than what you would normally expect. To me, that's one of the things that made it beautiful.
Yeah.
I kind of liken these two albums to The Dynasty and The Blueprint, or The Reason and The Blueprint. What we started to kind of figure out between The Dynasty and The Reason is what we nailed on The Blueprint.
Right.
And I told Pete this. I said, what y'all were starting to figure out on Mecca and the Soul Brother, and I think All Sold Out was the EP,
The
if I'm
EP,
not mistaken. Y'all finally nailed it, or Pete finally nailed it on the main ingredient. Like, you heard hints of what was going to come, and they finally nailed it on the main ingredient.
I bring up Pete Rock because he was known for his love of horns.
Yeah.
And I feel like my favorite Just Blaze beats really lean into the horns.
Right.
When I play Soul in the Horn, my whole hip hop crate was Just Blaze shit.
Right.
It's like Just Fire, Show 'em What You Got, You Don't Know.
Right.
And you Show 'em What You Got and You Don't Know in these certain records. There's an era when Jay-Z is touring and like where he's like really, really feeling himself in the best way possible.
Right.
Where he's just like, I got so many hits. Just play another one.
I got a million of these.
I got a million of these.
Yeah.
That era. Tell me what it's like to be on stage with Jay doing your records and he's
Right.
like, I got a million of these.
It's a dream come true, man. Like, going back to what I was talking about with the pipeline, with like outsiders and artifacts rhyming on my beats. It's like the, what do you call that? The full circle moment. You know what I mean? Like I remember when we did the Fade to Black show at the Garden, and I had DJ'd with him or for him before.
I was at that show.
Right, but that was like, it really hit me when we did PSA. And at the time, PSA was maybe a month old, because that show was right after the album drop. And when the red lights came on, like when the stadium lights went dark, and then the red lights came on, and then the piano started, and you could feel the anticipation.
The speech.
The speech happens, and the crowd already knows what's about to happen because they've been living with this record for a few weeks. But still, like, that was the very last record we did on that album. So for something that was literally just an idea in my brain 6 weeks or 5, 6, 7 weeks before, to now 40,000 people, like that's when it really hit me. Like, it's not the end of, but it's up until that point, it's the culmination of all those moments that I stood on stages playing other people's records, or I shouldn't say stages, but DJ booths, playing other people's records. And now all of a sudden, here I am playing my own records for a crowd of 30,000 people with arguably the top and best rapper alive at that point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a very, very surreal feeling that I can't necessarily put into words. It's very, very humbling though. Like, when you think about the journey in that aspect, coming into the game as a DJ.
Yeah, PSA is similar to what we do in terms of its ubiquity. And when we talk about Jay-Z in the scope of verses, and people like, there's nobody who could stand on that versus stage with Jay-Z, a lot of people feel that way. And when you start doing that scientific data, like, okay, well, let's have a battle royale. Let's see, let's put somebody up against Jay-Z. But when you get to PS, because me and my friends have done this. When you get to PSA, there's nothing that beats that.
It's a tough one.
What beats PSA on a versus stage?
You don't know.
You don't know.
And then also, let me just say this. I've been to a number of concerts. I love your concerts, Talib, before I go into it.
Thank you.
But I've been to a lot of concerts, Rihanna, Beyonce, whatever. And when I went to Jay-Z's concert, whatever concert that was before the On the Run concert, and I paid the same amount for Jay-Z's concert, way too much, as I paid for Beyonce's. But the difference is that Jay-Z did not want to get off stage. Like, he did not want to get off. He just kept giving us hits and giving us hits and giving us hits. And I'm like, this is a performer, and not only is it a performer, it's somebody that loves what they do and has earned the right to be like, fuck you, I'm staying on stage. And I'm going to keep playing these songs. So I will always appreciate him, because it's like, no one just has money to be shelling out for a concert. But I didn't feel like I wasted money at all.
So the interesting thing about that is, it's like, he actually genuinely appreciates the fans that come out and perform. And like, he's, obviously he has his core songs and his core stage run and setup and whatnot. But if you notice, when he has the most fun, a lot of the times it's when he does the whole, we got a million of these.
Yeah.
And like sometimes it's planned, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just like, yo, play something, play another one, play another one. You know, but that's actually how the B-sides idea came, the B-side shows came to be. Like, that was an idea that he'd been wanting to do forever, like literal years. I want to say we started discussing that idea in 2006, and it didn't happen until what? Within the last 7 years? Like, we did it. The craziest one was when we did, I could tell you, when he first wanted to do it at the first Made in America, it didn't happen, but we did it, I think, at the second or third one, where there were two main stages, like two equal main stages. So he headlined on the main stage, and that was supposed to be the end of the show. But we get in the golf cart, go around to the other main stage.
Yes.
So now I'm posted up on the main stage, nobody else, and all of a sudden I start playing the music and the lights just go, people lose their minds.
Wow.
And all B-sides, no singles, all B-sides, and just deep album cuts. But like, imagine, you've had this 20 plus year career, and because people expect you to play hits, at the shows, you never really get to the other records that you love. And to
but
a
what's
certain
not a hit
degree.
from Jay-Z?
Right. Well, some records are like career-defining records that were never hit radio singles.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So Ghetto.
Right.
Streets is Watching.
Exactly.
Certain records like Feeling It. Yeah.
So like we finally get to go out and do all those records and do it in the context where people will really appreciate it because it's not snuck in between 5 monster hit records. It's all the other records that you love that you normally don't get to hear at his shows back to back.
Yeah. When Jay-Z, about 5-6 albums ago, he said he was going to retire.
Right.
So I was in LA and he said, I'm going to do one more show at Madison Square Garden. I was like, God damn, I'm from Brooklyn.
Right.
I got to be at that show.
Right.
And Jay-Z is somebody who, he's put me on stage at the Meadowlands. He got on the Get By remix. He's been very helpful to me as an artist.
Right.
So I was like, I got a plane ticket. I bought a ticket to the show. I was a fan. I'm not trying to get backstage. I bought a ticket. And I learned something at that show. What I learned was, like, that was the first time I seen him do encore. And the whole crowd, hove up.
Right.
Yes.
The Black Album had just dropped. He had name dropped me on the album.
Right.
So I'm like,
truthfully, I'll probably be Talib Kweli, right?
And so, but this is what I learned. It's like the movie the Prestige, Christopher Nolan, when he's like, that's not the performance you're watching. He said when he's watching the old man with the fishbowl, he's like, no. The stage is not the performance. The performance is him pretending he's crippled.
Right.
That's the performance.
Right.
And so when I watched the Jay-Z show, I was like, oh, doing those songs, performing, rapping in the mic, that's not the performance.
Right.
The performance for Jay-Z is showing up. People paid all this money to see this man.
Right.
So the way in which he walks out on stage and stands there without saying nothing, and he got that just serious look, and he's just standing there, the crowd is losing their shit. I said in my mind, well, I can go home now.
Right.
Because that's
You felt the energy.
the performance.
That's the magic.
That's it. He's at the point, he's such an icon to our culture. All he had to do was show up. And if he had turned around and left, that'd have still been iconic.
Nah, that would not have been iconic for
No,
me.
it would have, because I look at the thing, I take a long view. Imagine if I could tell a story to my grandkids. Jay-Z came out, stood, looked at the audience, and walked back out. That'd be like an iconic.
Nah, that's the difference in our pockets, because you
I'm
can
biased.
afford to just
I'm all
throw away
for
a
the artist.
ticket. I ain't having that.
So, at some point, Jay-Z decides that he wants to enjoy his life a little bit more.
Right.
And he starts spending less time around Roc-A-Fella and around Baseline. And this is the era when Dame brings Dipset into the fold. Right. And for context, if you weren't in New York at that time, it's hard to describe the lock that Dipset had on the streets.
That movement was crazy.
It was almost rivaling in terms of energy and attention how people felt about Roc-A-Fella.
Right.
So it was like a very brilliant move to bring those things together.
Right, and have it come from the inside. Pause.
Yes, absolutely. This is how I know Just Blaze rarely lived in Baseline. Because you still say pause.
I can't help it. It's just ingrained in my. I tried to shake it. I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but it still happens.
Yeah, you have to have Dame Dash to thank for that.
Yes.
I know that those times with State Property and Dipset and all this energy, all this street energy, all this creative energy. You're creating Old Boy, you're creating these classic records. Describe that time in your life.
Hectic. You know, because at a certain point, me, you know, along with Goo and Dave and Shane, you know, like the technical crew, you know, like we had that pressure on our shoulders 24/7 because you got, like I mentioned earlier, Bleak is showing up at 10, right, on the dot. Hove is there by like 2. Dipset is showing up around 8. Somewhere in between there, various State Property or Get Low members are filtering in. And then Mac showing up at like midnight. So you're trying to find ways to manage this situation because you want that energy of everybody being under one roof because it was a lot of steel sharpening, steel happening, right? You look at a lot of the greatest movements in music, period, not just hip hop, but like within hip hop, you know, you had Hitsville.
Yeah.
You had Daddy's House.
Rough Riders.
You had Rough Riders, you had Bassline, and the common thread there is that everybody's under one roof and all this is happening at once, you know, and everybody just finding whatever space they can, whatever time they can. So you're not just managing the music, you're managing the personalities, you're managing the egos and everything else that comes along with the creativity. So it was hectic, but we got magic out of it.
Yeah, you did.
You know, there were times where it would get a little hectic because, you know, like the one thing that we never really had a schedule, you know, but after a while, again, the technical crew, we just start to kind of figure out who shows up when and who tends to work when and where they might need to go. Obviously, if Hov shows up, he has top priority of whatever and anything. But outside of that, it was a lot of playing Tetris and Jenga, you know. But it was also wonderful like that. You know what it is? You don't really know that you're making history. There's no way to know you're making history as you're making it. It's when you go back and look at it. You realize it. So when we were doing it, we were really just in the trenches. You know, like we're celebrating our successes. And, you know, we're looking at, they used to have like what we would call like the billboard wall where like every week we're counting, you know, framing, you know, like buying a billboard and framing the top 100 or whatever because we would have a new record on it every week. And I actually found one in storage last week, like last month or so, where we had like 9 at once, you know, and you know it's special, but because you're in the thick of it, you're just moving on to the next and on to the next, no pun intended. You know, and to be able to maintain that level of creativity, that level of energy, and that level of output, you know, I'm just blessed to have been a part of it.
Yeah, y'all really had a really, really long run.
Yeah.
And it was, as you said, hectic and tumultuous at some points.
Right.
Because you had this, it's a lot of testosterone, a lot of egos. You had Cam and them coming with a certain energy. Jay and them had a different energy. And then you have this record, Welcome to New York, which you produced.
Right.
Now, did you see Cameron talking about this record on Drink Champs?
I did not.
I enjoyed that.
Okay.
Because I enjoy hearing older, reflective Cameron.
Right.
Because Cameron was abrasive.
Right.
When he was, Cameron was like, very like, not give a fuck. Like, even on the end of that record, he's like, y'all niggas can suck my dick. Like, y'all, he's very like, like he was like Mace ran to Atlanta. He says this on the record.
Right.
Like, he's not giving a fuck.
Right.
So to hear him relate and sort of put a lens on it where he's being more reflective of things maybe he didn't see or understand at the time, but he understands now as a man.
Right.
He talks about how he was competing with Jay and how he felt slighted by Jay at that time.
Right.
And, you know, how Jay wanted to be on Old Boy. He didn't want him on Old Boy.
Right.
And I found that very enlightening.
It's funny because I had a very similar conversation with Jim Jones recently where he talked about how he came in the game kind of as a wrecking ball, not really knowing how to move and they were hot, you know, and at the time he just kind of had carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to do and move however he wanted to move. And as he's gotten older and looked back, he realized that, some of that necessarily wasn't the way to move. So it is interesting to see people's perspectives, 2 decades later. But the thing that I love the most is that it's not just seeing their perspectives, it's seeing their growth as people, right? Relating to that record specifically, I mean, was there like weird tension there? Yeah, to be honest, I don't remember a lot of the specifics of it because whatever it wasn't that heavy because they did the record together. I do remember Cam definitely had the energy of trying to outdo Jay, but at the same time, he was excited to get the record, to get the chance to do the record.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was a phase where, like, every few days he would come in like, yo, Jay said he's gonna come today and do the record. Jay said he's gonna come. I need a beat. So he was clearly excited at the prospect of the record happening. And I had, just known through conversations with other people, like with Dame or whatever, that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. But we're getting to that point where we're closing the album out. Like the album's pretty much done. Because of that, we were able to put his album out relatively quickly because a lot of the album was done.
Yeah, it happened quick. It was like, Cam is president of rock. Here's some music.
Right. So
yeah, what?
But yeah, so he comes in one day and he's actually like really excited. Like, yo, today is definitely the day that it's happening. I need that beat. I didn't have one. So the beat for Welcome to New York City, I had started it either that day or the day before, but that was meant for Freeway. Me and Free is like easy, so I'm like, I'll just make him something else. But then it was like, all right, we need some kind of a hook or something like, because I knew Jay's gonna come in and just do the record, do his verse, and Cam's gonna go in and do his verse, and then it's kind of gonna be up to us to figure out what the record is. So I went in and sang the Welcome to New York City myself. Like, that's the direction. Whether or not that ends up being the hook, that's the direction at least. Like, it is the announcement. You got Brooklyn over here, you got Harlem over here.
Blazettes, he's singing.
So I went in and did it. And Jewels hadn't filled in the hook yet. So it was just the Welcome to New York City. So then I had an idea to fill it out. That I was definitely like in the 80s bag. Like,
I just learned today that wasn't a sample, just as you said that. I'm thinking that that's some, because sonically it sounds like a sample.
Right, so I was definitely like in my like 80s action TV show theme, but then like maybe like a little bit of hair metal, not Styx, but more like Winger or,
That's real hair metal. Winger.
Right, yeah, but like the heavy synth stuff with the big dramatic stabs. Or like Supertramp, stuff like that. So that's kind of where my head was at that day.
Supertramp, I could see. You sampled Supertramp for Fabulous.
Yeah, for Breathe, yeah. So I go in the next day to record what could be the rest of the hook, but I was definitely in my Twisted Sister bag. So it was really bad, but sometimes you just got to try it, right? So what happened was Jay and Cam overheard me talking about the idea. So they were like, yo, go record it. I'm like, I'm not doing this in front of y'all. Like, one thing I don't do in a booth is sing in front of people. I'll go and put a reference down, but it's always like me or people that work with or for me.
Right.
Like, my ego is too fragile.
Speaking of which, Dave Young. What's up?
We'll talk about Dave.
Okay.
But that's actually, I'm actually happy you brought that up.
Yeah, I was just saying, it just popped in my head.
Right. So it's not even so much a fragile ego. It's just a self-consciousness. Like, I'm not a singer. So I go in and I start, they're like, yo, go do it. And I'm like, so I go to sing it, and then immediately they're like, nah, that's not it. But it was like something like, it was super, it was like, an 80s gunslinger cowboy movie. It was, don't approach us with your guns down, cause you're in the wrong side of town. Welcome to New York City. That was the whole thing. So we're like, yo, let's just keep the Welcome to New York City, because that part was dope, and I didn't sound bad singing that, but the rest, it wasn't it. It didn't match.
It's meant to be.
But yeah, they knocked the record out quick. I redid the hook the next day. They had Jewels come and do it. And that was one of those ones that we knew, even if the record wasn't a great record, which it was, but like just the magnitude of it being them too.
It's a very important record for New York hip-hop.
Right. Yeah,
very. And I remember it's not as big as some of those records of that era, and it's not as big as maybe it could have or should have been.
Right.
But it's for New York City,
right?
For the giant that Cam was at the time, and the giant that Hove was at the time.
Exactly. It's the Clash of the Titans.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny. I know we're going off the path for a minute, but like Dave Young, that's actually one of my biggest regrets. Shout out to Dave if you're watching. He actually lives out here. So I met Dave through Dame's cousin, Darren Chandler, who I didn't realize was the industry vet that he was until I went back and looked at, remember Trends of Culture?
Yeah.
I went back and looked at a Trends of Culture album cover, and Dame's cousin was like the executive
The
producer
main
of that
rapper
album.
at Trends of Culture, he's an actor now, right?
Is he?
He's an actor. I've seen him in a bunch of movies.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, Dame's cousin, Darren is like, yo, I got this kid, Dave Young, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all right, let's do it. So we get in the studio, and immediately, and I'm coming off of Usher's Throwback. So
That's a great record, bro.
Thank you. So I'm in that bag like heavy. And we were knocking out a bunch of sessions, and then he had this dude, he was signed to this dude, unbeknownst to me, TR, who I guess was affiliated with Noontime. Remember Noontime?
I remember Noontime, yeah.
I knew nothing about TR. I didn't even know he was in the picture. As far as I knew, me and Dave were going to do a record together. We were going to find a label situation and put the record out. So I'm moving according to that. And then here, all of a sudden, in my eyes, comes TR out of nowhere. Like, well, Dave is signed to me. And I'm like, so what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, and he was trying to do this thing where it was a 50-50 split. And me being young and naive at the time and not wording this correctly, I kind of basically said to him, but what do you bring to the table? Like, and it wasn't said from a place of disrespect. It was, if I'm doing all the music, if I'm doing all the creative and everything, like, where do you fit into this equation? Now, I'm 20-something at the time. I don't know much of the business outside of what I do. Looking back, I could see how that would be taken with as disrespect.
Yeah. Knowing how to talk to artists is a skill.
Right.
Yes.
Well, this wasn't the artist. This wasn't Dave. This
wasn't Dave.
The dude he was signed to.
Got it.
Right. So, speeding through it, Mary gets involved. Mary wants to sign him to, I think it was Monarch was her thing.
Yeah.
I forget. And as far as Mary was concerned, apparently she was signing Dave. And me and him were doing the album together. So now there's like 3 different parties. I don't really know what's what. And to be honest, I kind of just backed out. Like, there's so many cooks in this kitchen. And just a week ago, it was just me and you in the studio making records.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, these hands are coming out of nowhere. And, but every once in a while, I go back and I listen to that material that we did. And I always say to people, if you loved or if you liked Throwback, because me and Dave got about half an album done. That if you liked Throwback was like the demo version of what the Dave Young album would have been.
I could hear that because Never Been in Love is a staple in my catalog. It's one of my most popular records.
Right.
And it's what I'm doing on it, it's what you doing on it, but it's also what Dave's doing.
Did on it. Yeah. Shout out to Dave for sure.
And also shout out to Dipset and Jim Jones and his weather reports. Do you watch those?
I have not seen this.
I seen Dipset doing the weather on Fox News the other day.
What?
Oh yeah.
Was it Dipset or Jim Jones?
Excuse me, Jim Jones. I saw Jim Jones doing the weather because he be on Instagram
Going outside.
He'd go
and just
outside
doing it.
in his bathrobe and do a weather report. He'd been doing that for months. So then I seen him on Fox News in New York
doing the weather.
He had on the glasses, the chain,
right?
His Vamp Life chains and all that. Fully Jim Jones outfit,
right? Jim
but
Jones
doing
out.
the weather.
Like in front of the
with the green screen on the news.
Wow. On the green screen.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jim. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Wow.
And I'm also shocked that you didn't end up on Love and Hip Hop since all of the rest of Dipset did.
I mean, they asked me.
Well, I was talking.
Oh, you're talking about Just Blaze.
They asked me to.
They asked you too.
It was like the first season, and I was just like, they want me to do what? And they had like a girl to pair me up with and the whole thing, and I was like...
They had a girl to pair you up with? Was she hot?
I don't even remember who she was, to be honest. Respectfully, I don't. But I was just like, this sounds like we'll go left very quickly. And this was... Reality TV was a thing, but it seemed like one of those things that was just going to not end well. And yeah, I was like, nah.
So Live Your Life with Rihanna and T.I. was a mega hit. It was on Hangover.
The Hangover, yeah.
And the sample is a Russian beat that you sent along to your friends as like a joke beat. Is that true? Can you tell me the story behind that?
So this is the MySpace era still kind of, right? So one of the things that I used to do on MySpace was like take silly records or records that you wouldn't necessarily make a beat out of and make a beat out of them. So like that's how Hove's Kingdom Come happened, where I chopped up Rick James. That was from MySpace as a joke. And Jay just ended up catching wind of it because of Amir, because of Questlove.
When Kingdom Come. Okay.
Right. So Jay called me like, yo, what is this MySpace thing, this MySpace Rick James thing that people keep hitting me about? So that's how that record happened. So this record is, I guess now we would call it a viral video. Back then there wasn't even a term for it yet. But there was this video going around called Fat Kid Singing. And it was this heavy-set young kid singing this Maya. So I was looking at it like, yo, we should make something out of this. Just to be silly. Throw it up on MySpace. As I started doing it, I did the core of it. The homie Kanai came through and added some strings and played my horns over. And things started coming to me, like lyric-wise and concept-wise. So I call Andy, I'm like, yo, set the mic up. I kind of just start going through the motions of like my fake Jay-Z moments. I don't write anything down, right? I just pace back and forth and think of things to say.
Right. What you want me to do? I'm sorry.
I was definitely not the 60-second assassin, but I did get it done. So I started thinking about it, and at the time, I was very much on the outs with my ex-girlfriend at the time. So a lot of people think that Live Your Life is like this big triumphant, like, you can do it, go get them. Like something you listen to before you go run a marathon.
That's interesting.
That was really just me giving her the middle finger the whole time. Like, go live your life.
Live your life.
Live your life.
Right.
Hey.
You want to go be a shining star, fancy clothes, fancy cars, and everybody's going to know who you are. Go live your life.
Wow.
No telling where it might take you. And
shout out to Bad Breakups making great records.
Which is funny because nobody else has ever picked up on that except her.
Well, then,
Of
mission
course.
accomplished.
When the record came
Of course she picked up on it.
when the record came
That's
out,
perfect. That's how you're supposed to do it.
right? When the record came out, she's like, "Oh, so you're writing songs about me now?" So
She's like D. Ray McKesson talking about Planet of the Apes. You definitely talk about me with that vest.
Right. So I do the record. I don't know what I'm gonna even do with it. Like, I just had this record called "Live Your Life," and I wrote it up, demoed it. And that same night, either the same night or the next night, Tip calls me like, yo, I need one. I need it now. Justin Timberlake. Remember, he had a couple back-to-back records with Justin.
I was in the studio for that with Pharrell and Justin when they were finishing Sexy Back, because I had just gone to Africa with Justin.
Right.
And he was
Sexy
on
Back
my
sounds
album.
totally different than what the song is.
Sexy Back?
I know what the song is.
It is, yeah.
It sounds different.
In
when you
context.
say
What's
it
the
like
one with
that.
T.I. on it from that
My
era?
Love.
That's the one. They were mixing that one. But Sexy Back had just
come out. Right.
And they were mixing My
Yeah, My
Love.
Love was the follow-up to Sexy
Yeah.
Back. if I'm not
I'm
mistaken.
bringing Sexy Back.
Ain't that the name of the song?
Yeah,
Sexy?
but
it is.
Sexy Back just sounds like a sexy back.
I
and
have a
whose back
Sexy
is
Back as well,
sexy?
but that's not what we talking about.
So I'm like, yo, I got it. I got the record. Like, this record has gone from a joke to
a hit.
right, a potential hit.
But you're saying with Justin at this point.
But Justin at this point, right. So I send it to Tip. He gets it right away. He records. And then somehow, G's obviously, former Roc-A-Fella family. So is Jay Brown. And Jay Brown was handling Rihanna.
That's right.
So somehow in the very 11th hour, there's a change. They're like, yo, Rihanna's agreed to do it. She's in Italy. She was shooting a commercial, I think, for Gucci or Louis Vuitton, something. But they were like, she has time tonight to go into the studio and lay it down. So she went in, did her vocals super quick, sent it right back to me. And that was one that we knew. Because at a certain point, I started to strategize. Like, even though it initially started as a joke, I'm like, wait a minute. This fat kid singing video has gone super viral. Everybody around the world has seen it. They're automatically going to hear that chant, and it's going to be familiar to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was definitely a Jedi mind trick of sorts.
There you go.
But that,
Star Wars bros.
right? Yep. But the interesting thing about that record, and Sai tells this story all the time. Like, that record, the core of it stems from a record that he and I did together called "Believe It." I had this short run of like where I did that, I did "Believe It," and if you listen to "Believe It," then you listen to "Live Your Life." You're like, oh, I get it. Because then after that, I did Mano, All the Above as well with T-Pain. And I wrote that as well. So if you listen to like Believe It, to Live Your Life, to All the Above, you clearly hear the bag that I was in.
I definitely hear All of the Above and Live Your Life. I didn't hear Believe It until you just said it just now.
Right. But had I not randomly done that Believe It record with Psy, those other 2 records likely would have never gotten created.
That's crazy. Do you choose to, because the same thing you try to do with Saigon, you did a little bit more with J Electronica.
Right.
Is it your goal to try to find an MC to work on a project with? Or it just kind of happens?
Yeah, it just kind of happens, to be honest. Like, Sai was a little bit more of a mission, right? Like, that happened because of Sycamore.
Oh.
Sycamore at the time was a very young kid. And 2003, I'm on the Rock the Mic tour. And this kid is popping up in every hotel lobby. Now, Rock the Mic was a big tour. You have me, you have us, Jay, Snoop, Fifth, Missy, Sean Paul. And then you had, depending on the
locals.
Depending on the state, certain people are switched. I'm seeing Sick at like every other show or at the hotel lobby, so I'm assuming that he's there with somebody, and he's, very much pitching himself like, yo, I want to be an A&R, this is what I want to do. So after, a few run-ins, I'm like, so who are you here with? He's like, no, by myself. He was literally just like hustling his way.
Following the tour.
Yeah, following the tour, just hoping to run into people and whatever, so.
Smart.
Yeah, so.
I get it.
So I said, all right, bring me some artists that you believe in. So he bought me a few, and Psy was the one that made the most sense. So he made the connect. I gave Psy 3 beats. He brought me back to demos like 2 days later. And I purposely gave him beats outside of his normal wheelhouse just to see what he could do outside of street rap. J Electronica happened because of... in part because of Rashad Smith, actually, Tumbling Dice. But then what happened was, this was back in the iChat days, the Instant Messenger days. Jay stole my screen name. He either stole it from Erica or from Rashad, I forget who. But yeah, that also, like, there wasn't really a plan. It was just like, oh, he's cool. All right, yeah, come out of the studio. We didn't even make a record for like the first year of us even knowing each other. He just would come and hang out.
J Electronica, somehow, without releasing really a full-length J Electronica album, because that album he did with Jay-Z, to me, is a great album, but that's a group album to me.
Right.
Without releasing a full-length album, he has become one of the most important MCs of a generation.
Right.
And I feel extremely blessed. I feel like I don't know who else has more than one song with J Electronica besides Jay-Z, but I do. So I feel blessed.
Right.
That I'm like, yo, I'm one of the only human beings.
Right. Who has multiple songs.
Who has multiple songs with J Electronica. I've heard you talk about his work ethic and quote him when he said, my train is always on time.
On schedule, yeah. Always on schedule.
Always on schedule.
That's a Muhammad Ali quote, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But he used to use that all the time. Like, speaking of iChat, like, that was his status.
My train is always on schedule.
My train is always on schedule. He moves on his own time at his own pace.
Yeah. And I think he understands that his value, I think he thinks that, and he might be correct, that his value is in not having a project.
Right. Or is in just kind of being this rap unicorn that, you never know when he's going to pop up, but when he does, it's an event.
Fire.
It's a
Now,
thing.
how did y'all decide to make Exhibit A, B, and C? Well, I know Exhibit C was like a promo for Angela Yee, right?
Yeah. So Exhibit A, funny enough, was actually sponsored by Guitar Center and Roland. We literally made it for a Guitar Center album. One of the homies, shout out to Mike Shav, who's Jay's engineer, he had to connect, and there was another dude named Nate, if I'm not mistaken, who worked for GC. Guitar Center used to put out a compilation every year of music from their employees. You work at Guitar Center, you're more than likely a musician.
Father Shahid from Poor Righteous Teachers.
Yes, rest in peace.
Yeah, didn't he work at Guitar Center?
He worked at B&H. He might have been at Guitar Center before that. No, he was at Sam Ash.
Sam Ash.
Yeah,
okay.
Shah was at Sam Ash and then went to B&H. But yeah, so they used to do this compilation every year of all their employees' music. And each year they would get like one established artist to feature on the album. And it was something that they would give out for free to their customers. Like, you could just walk in and get one for free at the cashier stand. And in return, the artist would get the cover of the Guitar Center catalog for that quarter or that year or whatever. And they would basically just give you any equipment or any gear that you wanted. So I was a big Roland fan, so they linked with Roland, and Roland gave me damn near like all of their flagship product for that year. And in return, we agreed to give them a song for it was called Fresh Cuts, was the employee compilation. So initially, the only place that you could go get Exhibit A was if you went to Guitar Center and actually got a CD. And I had to chase him down to get it done. You know, he moves how he moves. I knew he was in Detroit, so I was like, I just hit him like, yo, I'm here. Like, we were supposed to deliver this song last week.
Yeah, you know it's crazy how the second record I got from him, there was a Farrakhan meeting.
Right.
I'm like, Jay's gonna be there.
Right.
I pulled up and I had my engineer Federico set up in the lobby of the hotel.
Right.
And it's like, that's how I got that record.
Wow. So yeah, I popped up. I'm like, yo, I'm here. I'm at Shav's house. Let's just knock this out. Because he wasn't completely incommunicado. We just hadn't locked down the time. So I was like, let me just go to Detroit. So we knocked that out in Shav's attic over the course of a day. Funny enough, for some reason, there's a version of that with me rhyming on it.
I want to hear that.
I want to hear it too. I kind of don't want to hear it, but I think he got me hyped that night. He's like, "Oh, do it." So I wrote a little 16 and did it. But anyway, so we do that, and then Exhibit B was him and Most were hanging out for a time, and they had the idea to do a group project. So I cut like 4 records with them in 2 nights. So Exhibit B came out of that session, or those sessions. And then, yes, Exhibit C was, we're all cool with Ange. Ange is like family. So she had the record, or she had her show the morning after. I think at the time it was on Sirius XM. So that's why at the end I'm like, the morning after, world premiere. But once we got the record done, by the time we got the record done, like the plan was to do it and bring it to the show the next day. We took so long to get it done that we had missed that window. So it's not like we couldn't have gone the next day, but I kind of started to realize it was more special than just a promo.
Exhibit C is one of the most important, greatest hip-hop songs ever recorded, in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of just held on to it. And to be honest, the only reason it came out the way it did was because I was doing, like once, twice a year, I used to go up to Shade 45 and do a DJ set. Generally, what I'm known for is going up to shows and playing things that people have never heard before, right? So I did a DJ. I think I was supposed to play for an hour. I got about 40 minutes in, and I honestly just ran out of records. I didn't know what else to play, and I didn't want to. I had played a bunch of exclusives, so I didn't want to go from that to, all right, let me just play regular records now. So I'm like, what else do I play that nobody's ever heard? So then I ran Exhibit C. And it's funny because I played so many dope unreleased records, like from major artists that night. Like I played Busta MOP records that nobody's ever heard. I think I played a Cam record that nobody had ever heard. But Exhibit C caused such a literal instant stir. Anything else that I played that night got negated. Like, and I know it's a cliche saying, like, the phone lines are lighting up, whatever. People were actually calling, like, yo, what is
that?
Right. And Reef, who used to be at Atlantic, who was at Sirius at the time.
Reef.
Yeah, shout out to Reef. Reef hits me like, yo, can I get that? So like Sirius basically ended up breaking that record. And from there, it just kind of became the legend that it is.
Well, thank you for making that record.
No doubt.
Thank you for being you. I have one more question before we let you get out of here. Why has there never been just a Just Blaze album?
I still get asked this like at least once a month.
I want it.
There's still time.
And somebody brought it up. Actually, it hadn't come up in a while. Somebody brought it up for the first time like about a month ago. For the longest time, like I was working on, in retrospect, I shouldn't have approached it this way, but at the time when I feel like that album would have made the most impact, I was working on so many projects at once, and so many people were trying to do compilations that for the most part didn't work. It kind of discouraged me from doing it. Like aside from Clues, I can't think of too many rap comps that were successful back then. Right, yeah. Aside from the professionals, and Clue wasn't even really doing the majority of those beats. He was getting the beats from people. So I'm like, am I a big enough star to warrant that? And at the time, 1,000% was, but at that time, that insecurity was speaking, and I definitely let the insecurity dictate me not pursuing that. Looking back, I totally should have, because I already had so much unreleased music with artists. I could have taken a lot of that stuff and just tailored it, And at one point, like towards the very end, like I remember me and Biggs and Dame had a conversation about that. Like, yo, just do that and do it under Roc-A-Fella, which would have made perfect sense. But that was like literally right when things started to fall apart. Funny enough, when that discussion happened, the day Ye brought Get By to listen to.
Wow.
I remember we were doing a photo shoot for something. I don't remember what it was, but I remember me, Biggs, and Dame are sitting there having this conversation. It wasn't at Baseline, it was at a photo studio somewhere. Ye comes and plays the CD, so at the same time, everybody's like, yo, what is this? And you were on it. Like, I want to say, Hov wasn't on it yet, but he's playing it for us for the first time, and we're having that conversation. And shortly after that, as we all know, is when things started to fall apart over there. When the breakup happened. So, had the breakup not happened, that conversation might have continued to go further.
Well, like Jazz said, you still have time, and I feel like it's supposed to happen when it's supposed to happen. I mean, the Black Star album, there's been many false starts, and it's been very frustrating to me. There's been times when we had deals on the table that went away, and all types of things have happened. But the way in which it's about to come out now, I'm like, yo, everything happened the exact way.
That's how it was supposed to come out.
Yeah. Right. And I feel like if we do get this Just Blaze album, it's because it was supposed to happen right now.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'll tell you this much. Artistically, creatively, now would be the time for me to do it because
for sure.
In terms of just technical ability, is in a totally different place than it was 20 years ago.
Well, then let's get it. The People's Party is honored and privileged to have the great Just Blaze on People's Party. Thank you.